Padme Amidala woke up feeling dizzy and confused. She was lying on a bed in a white room, and the buzz of medical machines was all she could hear. As she felt for the wounds on her back, she discovered a bandage. Barely any pain came from it. Her clothes have also been changed to something loose but practical that wouldn't put pressure on her wounds. She remembered driving into a big arena and fighting off some kind of beast. Yes, she'd been at Geonosis together with Anakin. They were about to be executed, but then the Jedi had arrived. Padme let out a relieved breath. She must have been saved then. She only hoped that Anakin was alright as well. Padme stood up and, wondering why the room was empty, she walked to the door. On the other side a guard stood watch, a young man in light grey armor and short black hair. "Good morning, miss," he greeted her politely. "Good morning," she returned somewhat confused. "Where is everybody?" "Most of the crew is busy with repairs. If you are feeling well, the commander has ordered you to be brought before him as soon as you wake up." "Who is the commander?" she wanted to know. "It's Lord Vader, of course. You are a guest on the SSD executive." Padme was confused. Lord Vader. He couldn't mean Anakin's father, could he? The senator didn't know any other noble with that name. "I feel fine, thank you," she answered the guard. "Was the ship badly damaged?" "The executor only has a few scratches, but some troops are being sent to the other ships that suffered more. Those clones are better at shooting than any droid, but they couldn't do anything against our raw firepower." They had started walking down the corridor, but something about the words of the guard felt strange to Padme. Clones? What was he even talking about? The last thing she remembered, the Jedi that had arrived to help them were severely outnumbered. "Excuse me, but do you know what happened to my bodyguard?" "A bodyguard?" "Yes, his name is Anakin Skywalker. He is a Jedi assigned to protect me." The guard merely continued to look ahead. "If he's a Jedi, he's probably dead." Padme felt her blood freeze. "What do you mean by that?" "A lot of Jedi were killed in the arena. If he hasn't left you behind to flee, he's probably among them." The senator stopped, trying to form words over the ridiculously noisy beating of her heart. "Exactly where am I?" The guard stopped as well and looked back at her. "I already told you, miss. You are on the Superstar Destroyer Executor, the flagship of the Confederacy of Independent Systems under command of the Supreme Commander Lord Vader, and currently resting in the orbit of the planet Geonosis." Padme felt her legs weaken and had to lean against the next wall. "Is everything alright, miss?" "Yes, just too many capital letters," she muttered with a dry laugh. She hadn't been saved after all. She was a captive. Confederacy of Independent Systems. She had never heard of something like that. The Jedi Master Kenobi must have discovered some kind of conspiracy, that's why they wanted to execute him. This was bigger than she had anticipated. Also, the Jedi were defeated. She couldn't believe it. They were the best of the best, weren't they? Of course they couldn't take on an entire army, but they weren't stupid enough to try either. And what was that about clones? What did all of this have to do with Anakin's father? Padme wanted to have answers, but she also knew that it might not be wise to stay long enough to get them. Maybe she could break away from her guard and find a hangar to steal a ship from. She could see a blaster at the man's hip. If she could grab it fast enough, she might be able to. "Don't even think about it," the guard said harshly. His voice had suddenly lost all friendliness and was cold and hard like an edged sword. He turned to glance at her with steel-like gray eyes. "I have been charged with your welfare personally, and if I have to bruise your arms to restrain you, my whole team loses a year's salary. If, by some miracle, you make it to a hangar, I'll be a dead man, so you can be sure that I will do everything in my power to get you to the commander. Please do the both of us a favor and don't do anything stupid. IUC can't speak to me like this." She tried to cover up her red face that clearly told that had been exactly what she'd been thinking. "I am a senator of the Republic, which is why you'll be treated as an honored guest, as long as you behave like one," the guard replied coldly. They had arrived at a pair of thick magnetic doors. The guard's tone changed again to friendly. "The commander awaits you, miss." Behind the doors, Padme found herself on what must be the bridge of the ship she was on. There were only a few droids to be seen. A lot of consoles that she would have thought needed constant surveillance were left empty, but there were still numbers and figures flickering to life on the monitors, so somebody must be controlling them. Lord Vader was the only human on the bridge. Padme recognized him immediately, even though she had only seen him once a decade ago. He was now wearing a heavy black cloak, the hood pulled back to reveal short brown locks. Age and weather had tanned his skin and given his face a hard, even curl edge. Still, he looked so much like Anakin it hurt. They were even holding themselves in the same manner, proud and uptight, confident, filling the entire room with their presence as soon as they entered. He had that same magnetic field around him that seemed to draw people to him, and made them unable to ignore him. Vader gave a nod to the guard, who quickly bowed and dismissed himself. Then he turned to her. "Senator Amidala. It's a pleasure to meet you again." "Lord Vader," she replied neutrally, wanting to test the waters. "It is unexpected to see you here, but I suppose I should thank you for having my injuries treated. Even if it were his allies who inflicted them on her in the first place. I am sorry you had to go through this. Master Kenobi is the only one whose blood I was seeking today. I never meant for yours to be shed." "Did you get what you wished for then?" Padme asked coolly. If Master Kenobi died, Anakin would be devastated. Darth Vader remembered the elaborate report he'd gotten just 20 minutes ago, describing how they'd found what appeared to be Kenobi's severed hand next to Qui-Gon's body. Yes, I have, he decided. For now. The price was high though. I lost one of my best men and a great friend today. Had wasn't sure what to say. On the one hand, she itched to remind him that if Vader hadn't conspired with the Geonosians about building an army, there never would have been a battle, and his friend wouldn't have died. On the other hand, she was aware that she was at the mercy of this man. She couldn't afford to anger him. He was a Sith Lord after all, and according to Anakin, those were easy to anger and quickly ready to see blood. I am sorry for your loss, she replied at last as diplomatically as possible. Though I don't quite understand why you would chose to have me captured if you could have been there helping your friend. Something like real sadness flashed over Vader's face. It was the first human reaction she saw with him today, and she couldn't help but wonder if maybe he did regret what he'd done, even if just a little bit. It is all about priorities. I am willing and capable of sacrificing those that gave their life to me, in order to protect what is most important to me. Qui-Gon knew and understood that. What is it that you want to protect? My family, of course. Padme didn't understand. Was it Lord Vader fighting against the Jedi and with them, against his own son? Who belongs to your family? She whispered. Ah, Vader made with a slight wistful smile. I knew you were a clever girl. You are starting to ask the right questions. But I cannot answer you. Not yet. Maybe never. You will have to find out on your own. In the meantime, Padme replied carefully, will I remain a guest on your ship? You may stay here as long as you wish, of course, Vader answered. If you want to leave, you'll have to wait another few days. There's one of my men in the hands of the Republic that I would like to free. I have arranged for an exchange of prisoners to take place soon. Padme could barely believe her luck. She was going to be free. She had already painted her future in the worst colors, but Vader was surprisingly hospitable. What if they don't agree to an exchange? She still had to ask. They would be incredibly stupid to do so, Vader said. Of course, we're talking about the Republic, so it is still a possibility. However, I doubt they would leave a beautiful senator such as yourself in my hands forever, not after they have so traitorously attacked a neutral planet that had done nothing but providing the peaceful trading alliance with a basis for their personal security fleets. Their image is already damaged as it is. Padme had to silently agree with him. The Jedi had attacked to save Kenobi, Anakin and her. Not only had they apparently lost the battle, but if they had not even been able to save all 3 prisoners, the image of their invulnerability would suffer greatly. Can I ask one more question? Of course. Padme braced herself. What happened to your son? She voiced the question as if she was concerned for Vader, as if assuming he would suffer if Anakin was hurt. He would see through it, of course. There wasn't a chance he would believe she actually cared for his feelings. It might, however, distract him from the sheer need she had to know what happened to the young Jedi. Lord Vader suddenly had a faraway look in his eyes. My son, he muttered, looking at her but somehow, looking through her. I don't know what happened to him, he said at last. That's the worst of it. I think that he is happy. I want to believe that he is, now that I'm not in his life anymore. He has his friends that care about him. He has an army that stands behind him. But I cannot stand beside him, never. It is only through my death that I can erase all the darkness from this world that threatens him. His gaze focused and he looked at her white eyes again. I'm sorry, he whispered, and now it was definitely sadness in his voice. I'm so sorry, Padme, that I couldn't be there for him. And he looked at her with such yearning, such honest blue eyes that she was sure he wasn't really talking to her. He was confused, somehow, seeing someone else in her. Yet his emotions were real and they were so grand, so comprehensible that they seemed to eat him alive from the inside, as if his soul was bleeding out. It made her beyond uncomfortable because even though he looked so similar to Anakin, the fact remained that she didn't know this man, and it was wrong for a cold military leader like him to open up so completely to a stranger like her. Padme felt that if she just gave him a little push his entire being would shatter. For a tiny second she actually considered doing so, but she quickly thought better. The last thing she needed was for the guy who leading a war against the Republic to have a mental breakdown while she was in the vicinity, and he had an entire fleet at his command. It's okay, she said at last. I'm sure you did everything you could. His eyes lit up a bit with a faint hope. You forgive me. I accept your apology, she replied. She didn't really have another choice. She couldn't really forgive him for fighting against Ani. It was not okay. She could, however, recognize that he truly was sorry, and that he only fought for what he thought was right even if it was wrong. But it is not me you have to ask for forgiveness, she continued. It is Anakin. He blinked. What? I don't think he understands why you didn't help out when the Geonosians wanted to kill us. It will be prudent to explain things to him, Padme said as soothingly as she could. Maybe if Vader thought about how to explain his actions to Anakin, he would realize that there really was no explanation, and he ought to stop fighting a pointless war. Or so she hoped. Instead, Vader scowled as if she said something disappointing. Anakin does not exist, he said shortly. He died a very long time ago because he was weak. This is a new time. I can't let it happen again, I can't be weak. And you. She was flinching back now as his glare grew more intense. You can't be here. I have to get rid of you, for just a second." He seemed to choke on his own words. "You don't belong here." Abruptly he whirled around, his flapping robe almost hitting her face. "Guards," he called, and with a swish one of the doors opened to reveal the same man who brought Pat to the bridge. Panic hit her for a moment. Get rid of her. What did that mean? Was he going to kill her after all? And what did he mean? Anakin died a long time ago. He wasn't making any sense. "Yes, sir. Bring the senator back to her room where she is to remain for the duration of her stay here. I don't want to see her face anymore." "Of course, sir." The guard grabbed her arm to pull her through the door. He wouldn't have needed to. Pat was more than glad to escape the bridge and the still reeling Sith inside. The door closed and Darth Vader was left alone. The Force trembled around him as he fought to keep his emotions from exploding. Pat was older now. She looked more like the Pat he used to know, and for a moment he had forgotten himself, had forgotten who or where when he was. He couldn't afford to slip up like that. One of these days it could cost him his life, or worse yet, the lives of those he cared about. Darth Vader was the only name he listened to these days, and it had to stay that way. The world wasn't ready for two chosen ones. He had to stay firmly separated from his other self to be able to play his role, and that meant separating himself from Pat. He wished he could show her who he was in the inside. He wanted to open up to her and tell her that he was doing all of this for her and their family, but he couldn't. He mustn't, because she, like everyone else, had to see nothing but Darth Vader in him, the ruthless Sith Lord and cold-blooded commander. Even if there was still a piece of Anakin Skywalker left alive in him, she must never know about it. If she did, it would be oh so easy for her to convince him to give up his ways and join their little family. It was what he wished for the most for himself, but it couldn't be. It was a position where he would once again be forced to watch the destruction of everything he cared about, and he wouldn't go through that again. Maybe, once Sidious was dead, once the Republic had fallen so hard they had to build up something new from the ruins, maybe then he could allow himself to be close to them again. Only then they wouldn't want him anymore. "Good morning, Master." Obi-Wan opened his eyes sleepily. "Good morning, Anakin." It wasn't really morning. It was almost lunch, and Anakin grinned at him, probably thinking Obi-Wan had slept through half of the day. He had. He was awake since the early hours, haunted by images of his dead master, and only just awoke from a light nap. But his Padawan didn't have to know that. "I have good news and better news," the young man proclaimed. "Which do you want to hear first?" "The better news," he decided. He could use something to lift his mood. Anakin grinned a little broader and waved at him with what appeared to be a severed arm. "I thought I would lend you a hand, Master." "What in the name of the Force?" "It's an artificial hand. I worked on it the whole night. You should be able to use it like a normal hand. See, it even has rosy skin and everything." Obi-Wan felt a bit faint looking at the robotic hand. Somehow it made the loss of his real hand more apparent. He had been trying to ignore the stump lying next to him on the bed. "You made this for me," he repeated. "But how do you know how?" Anakin's face fell a bit. "Well, making prosthetics was one of the main branches in my family's business on Tatooine, aside from droids." "Did you learn it from your father?" The young man tensed up even more, as if caught by something he shouldn't do. "Maybe. What does it matter?" "Anakin, please don't misunderstand me. It is just that as the situation is now, we will need every piece of information about him that we can get. It just seems a little odd that a Sith Lord who never lost a limb would know so much about prosthetics." "Well, I don't know," he said hotly. "People got their limbs cut off on a daily basis on Tatooine. It's how punishment is delivered now that the Hutts aren't there anymore to enslave people. Maybe it was just good business. That would imply he planned to take over the planet and change its politics a lot sooner than he did, and that something happened to change his mind." Anakin sighed. Yes, I know, I'm great and everybody wants to get their hands on me." Obi-Wan chuckled a bit. "Now tell me, what's the good news?" His Padawan straightened his back. "The Council has decided that I'm going to be knighted in a week." Obi-Wan felt his jaw go slack. "But Anakin, that's wonderful. How in the name of the Force is that only the good news?" The Jedi slumped his shoulders a bit. "I still don't think I deserve it. They're just making a lot of promotions now that the situation is so tense everywhere, and we'll probably have to go to war. I didn't do anything noteworthy." There was something else though, something that Anakin didn't voice, but Obi-Wan felt it anyway when he touched his Padawan's mind briefly. He felt that the day he was to be knighted should be his day only, his special day. He didn't want to share it with a bunch of other Padawans. Obi-Wan knew that feeling, knew it well because he had felt the same when Qui-Gon had ended his education so abruptly. Anakin knew that as well, which was probably why he didn't mention it. For that, Obi-Wan was thankful. "Anakin, we already talked about this. It is only because of you that there even is a war to fight that we still have a chance to protect this galaxy. I know, but I just don't feel like a knight right now, that's all." "Because you couldn't save the maiden?" Obi-Wan asked knowingly. Anakin blushed, giving him all the answer he needed. "I'm sorry that we had to leave her behind," he said. "But you have to put it out of your mid. There is nothing you can do." "No, there has to be something. I can't just abandon her." I mean, protecting her was my duty. As soon as you're better I can take a few men and go back to search for Anakin. No. You can't do that. Why not? She's a senator, isn't she? Somebody has to be sent to save her, why not me? Because Obi-Wan stopped here, just looking at Anakin helplessly. Unfortunately, his Padawan used that moment to return the light touch of his mind, searching for whatever caused his master discomfort. Obi-Wan wasn't fast enough to hide his thoughts, and Anakin's eyes widened at what he saw. She's not on Geonosis anymore, he whispered. But I don't understand. How do you know that? Obi-Wan sighed. There wasn't any use in hiding it now. I had to give my report earlier this day to a member of the High Council. Apparently, the senator has fallen into the hands of Lord Vader. Anakin didn't know what to say to that, mainly because he didn't know if that was good or bad news. How do they know? He asked at last. He proposed an exchange of prisoners and sent a hologram of her as proof. She seems to be well. Then she's going to be free. The situation is more complicated than that. Why? The hostage Vader wants back is one of the warriors fighting with the red lightsaber during the battle. If this man we caught is Vader's apprentice, we can't let him go. Not only is he too dangerous to be let free, but he could also have valuable information. But you said it yourself, there was more than one person fighting with red lightsabers. Even if one of them is a Sith apprentice, which doesn't make any sense since last time I checked. The council assumed Dooku and my father to be master and apprentice. Do you really think it would be the one weak enough to get caught? I know, Anakin. They asked me for my opinion and I told them it would be wiser to agree to the exchange before Vader decides to come and personally free this person. They're still discussing the matter. If they do decide to do an exchange, I'm sure they will offer you to be part of it. It would be the smart thing to do. Vader had let his son walk free once. If he was part of the rescue team, chances were that he would succeed again. But what if they don't agree to it? What if they decide to just let her die? Then, my young Padawan, you will have to accept their decision. We cannot risk the lives of thousands to save a single one. It was about time Anakin learned this lesson. Maybe it was even best that he learned it now before he was knighted, and Obi-Wan lost his authority over him. The rule of no attachments had always been the one Anakin had the most trouble with. It was this characteristic of him that could very soon break his neck when Vader used it against him. Anakin didn't make another mention of the senator, but he was fidgeting the entire time, and when he finally left the room he seemed strangely relieved. What Obi-Wan didn't know, though he suspected it, was that Anakin took a shuttle over to the ship carrying Master Yoda immediately. The old GD was still in the middle of the meeting Obi-Wan had mentioned, and so Anakin spent half an hour pacing in front of the room. When the doors finally opened, he could barely keep himself from storming in. Master, he addressed Mace Windu, the first GD to leave the meeting. I heard that there was to be an exchange of hostages involving Senator Amidala. I feel responsible for what happened to her, and would like to offer my help in the matter. Windu merely gave him a scowl. Unfortunately for her, the prisoner we have managed to secure has been deemed too valuable to be given back to the hands of the enemy. Anakin's eyes widened. What do you mean? There will be no exchange of hostages. Then I'd like to be part of the rescue team. But the GD Master shook his head. We need to reorganize our forces before we can attempt any attack. The Chancellor has ordered us to come back to Coruscant. We will need every GD in preparation for the Confederacy's counterstrike. Anakin felt as if an ice block had been dropped in his stomach. There would be no rescue. The GD were going to let Pat die. They forbid him from doing anything to save her. How long would she survive as a hostage in his father's hands? What would he do to her? Anakin liked to think his father wouldn't hurt her. He had never seen him kill an unarmed woman, and Padme was smart enough not to defend herself when there was no immediate danger to her. The danger didn't lie in physical torture. Padme might be a senator, but she wasn't privy to any important military information. What Anakin feared most was that his father would warp her mind and shake her beliefs with his words and fake displays of politeness and affection. It was what had made Anakin unable to cross his blade with him. At least, he hoped that his affection had been fake. The alternative, that he believed in what he did, that he really thought it didn't matter that they now stood in opposing sides in the war, that all the bloodshed he was going to bring was a tolerable sacrifice for whatever goal he had, and that he deluded himself in thinking Anakin would come to see his ways that frightened him even more. It meant that his father truly had lost his mind, that he was so far engulfed in the dark side that he couldn't see clearly anymore, and in such a state, it was indeed possible that he would lash out at Padme in a fit of anger. His father had never beaten Anakin, but sometimes his temper had flared. At those times, his aura, what he now knew to be the dark side, had risen and lashed out at him. It hadn't hurt him physically as he had always pulled up shortly before his darkness actually penetrated his own natural force presence, before entering his mind and accidentally shredding it apart. Still, every time it happened he had felt dirty and tainted for days afterwards, the darkness clinging to him like blood on his hands. Anakin was strong and he had gotten used to it until it barely affected him. But the thought of Padme anywhere near him, her mind under the pressure of Vader's dark presence, frightened, scared. The GD knew how disconcerting it could be to be under Vader's scrutiny, to feel his intense, soul-searching gaze on him. He knew how to deal with it, he had grown up with it. At times, he had even enjoyed being the center of attention of his father. Now, he wouldn't hurt Padme as long as he was still hoping to get his own hostage back, but when the council refused his offer, there was no telling what he might do. When she had no use for him anymore, he might kill her off just to prove a point. Maybe it would be different if Anakin hadn't denied that she was his girlfriend. Maybe if he was convinced that the Jedi cared for her, he would keep her if just to have leverage over him. Consciously, Anakin knew that would be even worse because he was a Jedi. He wasn't supposed to feel such attachment, and he most certainly wasn't supposed to let a Sith use it against him. And he would use it, he had even said so himself. Anakin didn't know how far he would go for Padme. Would he join his father? Fight against the Republic? Against his fellow Jedi? He didn't know, and that frightened him. Luckily, he didn't have to offer Vader his loyalty in order to get Padme free. There was something else, something far more expendable that his father wanted. Now Anakin just had to find out where they kept that prisoner. XXX. General Fearl opened his eyes when he noticed a presence getting closer to his cell. He felt it in the Force before he heard the steps. It was a powerful presence of Jedi, then. Fearl snorted. He didn't make any move to get up from the ground. He didn't want to pay the Jedi any respect by meeting him standing, but above that, he was exhausted. The Zabrak hadn't slept for 5 days. Those dang Republicans wouldn't let him. His cell was always bright as day. In irregular intervals a sharp, annoying noise would ring from a speaker he couldn't see, waking him up whenever he dared closing his eyes. His meals were very sparse as well, just enough to keep him alive. Whenever he tried to sleep regardless, a group of clones would enter and make sure he didn't get a minute of rest. It wasn't quite torture, they were the good guys after all, but his treatment was meant to break his spirit. They weren't stupid enough to believe he'd give them any information from just that. Well, they had in the beginning thought he'd agree to a deal, but Fearl had merely mocked them, sending their troops off to faraway uninhabitable planets in search for enemy bases. No, by now they were merely hoping he'd crack enough to slip up unintentionally when the real interrogation started. Of course Fearl would never tell them anything. He was well aware that he was the weakest of the Zabrak brothers, and that Lord Vader didn't have any good reason to risk any resources to save him. It was his own fault that he was here now. He had been careless. Fearl would have to prove his strength by escaping out of his own power. Only then would Vader take him back. But he had to find a way out soon, because if he didn't, it would be his brothers who'd be punished for his failure. Fearl shuddered at the thought. He remembered quite clearly when Savage had messed up an easy mission in which he had to intimidate a corrupt politician. He'd shown him his face, something that Lord Vader had strictly forbidden all of them. Maul had to go and slaughter said politician, any witnesses that had been present and their families and friends as well to cover it up. As a punishment, Savage had to watch as Vader peeled the skin off Fearl's back and worked his bare flesh with lighting for the most agonizing 5 minutes of his life. It had been the day he truly started fearing Darth Vader. Still, that pain was nothing against what he felt when Vader had broken every single bone in Maul's legs, after Fearl had killed a customer he'd been meant to protect in a fit of anger. To see his normally stoic powerful brother writhe and cry as his skin ripped open and bones protruded from it, crushed from the pressure Vader put on them with the Force, to see the silent accusation in his eyes, and to be pushed away with a sneer of contempt, he never wanted to see that again. His brothers always forgave him. They never hated him for being the reason of their pain, because Fearl had been at the receiving end of Vader's punishment often enough himself. Still in that moment, they couldn't do anything else but hate each other. It was the only thing that made them go through it. They had to concentrate on that hatred to push away the pain or they'd go mad. When you're so far down the path of darkness, hatred is the only thing that gets through such pain. Fearl doesn't want his brothers to hate him, not even for a moment. He's failed, he knows that, but he'd die before he makes it any worse by giving away information. The fact that they're sending a Jedi means that they'll start the interrogation now. Fearl had expected them to wait a little longer. Maybe try again with some clones. Given that he ripped the last batch they sent him apart using the Force in his bare hands, it's not surprising that they don't. Only a Jedi would be powerful enough to even survive interrogation with him, but a Jedi wouldn't be able to inflict the kind of pain necessary to win him over. The only real threat would be them trying to attack his mind using the Force, and Fearl hasn't been weakened enough by food and sleep deprivation for that to work. They probably just want to make one final offer before they resort to that. Well, he'll show them just how strong his mind was. Vader had trained him for this as well. When the door finally opened, Fearl was surprised that he actually recognized the Jedi. How could he not when he wore the same face as the source of all his nightmares? Anakin Skywalker looked a bit haunted himself but still determined. He had a lightsaber in his right hand. It was not activated, but he gripped it tightly, as if he was only waiting for an excuse to ignite it. A group of 4 clonetroopers was covering his back, their blasters pointing at him. "Today is your lucky day," Skywalker declared, and it took all he had for Fearl not to duck his head under that oh-so-familiar intense glare. "You'll be leaving this cell. Stand up." Fearl didn't move an inch. He just continued to glare at the boy suspiciously. And he was a boy. There was some sort of innocence still around him. It was the reason Fearl hadn't recognized his Force presence. It was very similar to Vader's, but this innocence, this light was something that would appear entirely inappropriate around the Sith Lord. Firo couldn't remember the last time he had felt that innocent. Dang, had the boy ever killed someone? Skywalker sighed in exasperation. I don't have time for this, he muttered and came closer. Be careful, sir, one of the clones warned and raised his blaster a bit higher. He didn't need to. Lord Vader had made it perfectly clear that if any of the Zabraks hurt one of his family without his explicit permission, he was going to let a coin toss decide whom of them to kill. Not just torture, kill. Vader's punishments were always harsh, but that rule had been the only one he'd ever set that he declared would be punished with a death sentence. A slow death, of course, when they had to watch for hours until finally Vader would allow one of them to deliver the final blow to their brother's neck to release him. I'm Anakin Skywalker. What is your name? Skywalker tried again. Though his words were civil, his tone was annoyed as if he didn't really consider him worthy of his attention. Firo didn't react. He had refused to give out information, and his name counted under that as well. He hadn't given any of his interrogators his name before. What made the GD think he would do so now? Fine, don't tell me, Skywalker snapped at last, his patience running short. It doesn't matter. I know you have to be someone higher up for my father to want you back. Firo was momentarily surprised that Skywalker still called Vader his father. He would have thought he'd have distanced himself from him by now by calling him by his name. The idea of anyone feeling some kind of real affection towards that man was simply foreign to him. Sure, Firo could respect him, even admire him for his power and battle prowess. Despite everything he'd done to him and his brothers, he didn't really hate him either. Vader had been a strict but just master. That didn't change the fact that Firo was terrified of him. You're to take part in an exchange of prisoners. Now I can let these clones stun you, you can come with us willingly. Your choice. That at last got a reaction from Firo. His mouth opened slightly, brows knitting in confusion. An exchange of prisoners. That didn't make any sense. Vader didn't take prisoners. At least not from his enemies. Any prisoners taken were tortured for information and then killed, but they were never returned for political advantages or other persons. Vader preferred to win a war with raw power rather than negotiation. If he had a prisoner valuable enough to exchange for Firo, he'd torture this person for all that it was worth, and it would take more than 5 days for that. Even then he wouldn't return the body, not even for him. So then, what did this mean? Was the GD simply lying? But what for? To get him out of the cell. He was right, he'd only have to stun and drag away his body for that. An exchange, even a fabricated one, wouldn't force him to give them any information. Firo felt cold as he got another idea. Could it be that Savage and Maul were acting on their own, offering an exchange without Vader's permission? It was something he would trust them to do, but the consequences if Vader found out this was betrayal. This was treason. They'd all be killed for this. No, he decided, grinding his teeth. What? Skywalker narrowed his eyes. I wouldn't be going anywhere with you, Firo continued, and stood up to better be able to dodge the blaster fire that was sure to follow. Don't you understand what I just said? You're going back to your master. He practically spat out the word. Now move before I come to my senses and leave you here to rot. Firo still didn't move. Skywalker cursed. For a moment he looked like he swallowed something foul. Then he spoke very quickly in Huttese, a language that Firo knew well from having to deal with the disgusting creatures in the past years a lot. More importantly though, the clones behind him didn't understand it. I promised my father I'd get you out of here, and I'm not going to disappoint him. Now move before the other GD notice that I've come here without authorization. Only years of harsh training prevented Firo to show his shock. Skywalker was a spy, of course. Objectively it made sense. They were father and son after all. It should have been impossible to hide it from the GDs still. But if his brothers had orchestrated an exchange, it didn't make any sense for Skywalker to lure him into it by pretending to work for Vader. That he did so meant he couldn't actually afford to stun him. He needed him to stay conscious and to cooperate. That would only make sense if wasn't allowed to free Firo. So then, did he tell the truth? There wasn't much Firo could lose even if he didn't. He still wouldn't give him any information just in case. Maybe it wasn't about Firo after all. Maybe this was Skywalker's trial of fire, the moment he had to prove his loyalty to Vader. Fine, he finally said, and allowed the clones to bind his hands behind his back. They were magnetic binds, of course, not a chance to break free using the Force. The group got to the hangar without problems. In there, Skywalker commanded, pointing to his starfighter. Sir? One of the clones asked, clearly noting that there was barely enough room for 2 pilots in the ship. It's a one-on-one exchange, no other parties allowed, Skywalker claimed. Don't worry about it, there will be other backup. The clones were still hesitant, but they didn't stop Firo from climbing into the fighter. So there's more to you than meets the eye, huh? Firo laughed as soon as they started. The GD ignored his words. There really is an exchange, but the council refused it. I hacked into their database and found out they want to set up an ambush at the meeting place. We have to break through their blockade and find my father's ship before it can land. Your disguise will be blown after that, he notices. Firo was still suspicious. If Skywalker really was a sleeper, it didn't make sense to use him now, for a pawn like him with comparatively low value. No, it won't. The decision to refute the offer was made by the GD Council. I'll simply claim to have acted on orders of the Senate instead. They're after all the highest authority. That may give you enough time to get away, but not to get back in. The prison in my father's keeps is a senator, so it isn't, strictly speaking, a lie. In the worst case, I still have other friends high up who will cover my back. I really hope Lord Vader told you to do this personally, Fierl replied. If not, you're going to get into a heck of a lot of trouble for risking that much. Can't you just say thank you and be done with it? Skywalker snapped. He had finished setting the coordinates for the hyper jump. Maybe if you open the binds. Not an ice cube's chance on the Stafer, the GD muttered and pushed the button. Darth Maul watched on the monitor how the starfighter docked onto the hangar. He activated his comlink. Bring the senator, he commanded. He waited until the fighter opened to reveal a somewhat grey-looking but uninjured Fierl and a fiercely scowling Skywalker. The message they'd received had been surprising to say the least. Not only had the place for the exchange been changed from the neutral ground of a small moon to the enemy, bringing their prisoners straight to them, but also they had been warned about an ambush. Of course Maul had half expected there to be one. They'd actually set up their own little ambush. But Skywalker coming to deliver the Sith himself and alone, that was unexpected. Do you think it's a trap? Savage asked from behind him. The Sith apprentice turned to leave the security room. Even if it is, we have to risk it, he decided. He wouldn't let his little brother down, not again. It's almost sad we have to give her up, Savage mused as a couple of droids brought the senator to them. She's become somewhat of my favorite human. The master's been in a great mood ever since she came here. Maul gave his brother a weird look. He's locked himself in his meditation chamber and doesn't speak to anybody. He would even attend the exchange even though I informed him it was Skywalker who brought Fierl here. Normally he wouldn't leave out a chance to get a go at the boy. How is that proof of his good mood? Savage shrugged. He hasn't tortured us yet. That, Maul had to concede, was true. He had expected to suffer for Fierl's failure in being caught. It was possible that it was still to come, but Maul was only glad that Vader had waited long enough so that they'd be able to ensure Fierl's safety themselves. He very much doubted Vader's mood was good, but in this case, his breeding was terrible. What is going on? The senator wanted to know as the droids dragged her behind them. Follow me, Maul simply said and lead them to the hangar. Shortly before the doors opened, he grabbed her arm roughly as she was moving too slow for his taste. Han! Skywalker cried out as soon as he saw her. Completely forgetting about his own prisoner, he ran towards her but still had the mind to draw his lightsaber before he actually reached them. Are you alright? Yes, I am. Meanwhile Savage had stepped forward from behind his brother and quickly freed Fierl of his bindings. He gave him a quick pat on the back and a questioning glance to ask if everything was alright, which Fierl answered with a grim nod. That was all that was needed between them. Maul let go of the senator and she rushed towards the GD. It effectively prevented him from activating his saber as he had the hands full of woman. Lord Vader will be most pleased that the exchange went smoothly, Maul declared. You are dismissed, Skywalker. The GD looked up at him, for the first time taking his eyes off the girl. Really, one would think they were a couple or something. That's it? He asked suspiciously. You're letting us go. I might change my mind if you don't stop asking stupid questions, he returned. Truth to be told, he'd half a mind to just murder whoever came to pick up the senator as soon as Fierl was free. Vader had told him not to, but he didn't see a reason why he shouldn't. Or more precisely, why it would anger his master if he disobeyed just this time. He'd been so worried about Fierl this whole time, he needed to kill something. But the GD had sent Skywalker of all people. A smart move in hindsight, though it troubled Maul that it was already that well known that Vader wouldn't kill his son. Of course he knew that was kin to the point. Vader wanted to play his mind games with the boy, and for that he had to frequently meet him on missions. Allowing him to succeed now and then was the only way to coax the GD into sending Skywalker to confront him again. Maul knew that his master didn't care about the war. It was just a means to an end, one that he happened to enjoy. Maul didn't care about the Republic either, but it did hurt his pride to have to declare defeat again and again, just so that Vader could have his merry time with his son. In the end it would be him who had to explain this whole thing to the Separatist Council. Normally that would have been Qui-Gon's job. Vader just hated politics so much he didn't trust himself not to kill some of the council members if he had to defend himself. As his second in command, that was now Maul's job. It really was a shame that the old man had died. Maul had never listened much to diplomacy lessons. Oh well, he'd just have to use intimidation instead. Anakin, let's go, Amidala urged the GD. Skywalker threw one last suspicious glance at them before they hurried to the fighter. Fierl stepped next to Maul and, having examined them both and found them uninjured, asked. Skywalker isn't really a spy for the Lord, isn't he? Maul turned to him somewhat disbelieving. He better not be. All of this only serves the purpose to draw him to our side, doesn't it? For a moment there was silence between the three brothers as they watched the ship take off. There's totally something between those two, Savage muttered. Yeah, Fierl agreed. Definitely. Silence. Then, what do you mean by that? Savage and Fierl looked at their brother, who returned the gaze confused. Like they're flying sparks. you know. Butterflies and stuff, Firil said awkwardly. Maul blinked. Butterflies. He's talking about sexual tension, Savage offered. Oh? Right. Darth Maul fell kinda stupid for a moment. You think so? They both stared at him for a couple of seconds. Then Firil burst out laughing and Savage grinned, boxing his shoulder in a friendly way. Let's go to the cafeteria, Firil decided. I'm starving. Hey. Maul protested, not liking being left standing like that. You're such a virgin, Savage teased and dragged him behind them. Maul was really glad he couldn't blush. I'm not. He really wasn't. There just wasn't much time between training, slaughtering criminals, missions, dodging Vader's attempts to test him, and more training to meet girls. He was a Sith apprentice after all. He had to meet certain rules, and other than with his brothers, Vader did keep a tight schedule and close tabs on him. It really wasn't his fault that he wasn't getting as much female attention as he would have liked. Still, even though it was embarrassing, it was also a relief to have both his brothers back and at his side. There wouldn't be much time in the coming years of war for such easy banter, and he was determined to enjoy it in the time he had. XXX, Chancellor Palpatine, also known as Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith, was angry. Furious even. It wasn't the failure of his army on Geonosis that angered him. On the contrary, the greater the threat through the Separatists, the more support he would gain in the Senate with the pro-war campaign. What really annoyed him was that he hadn't expected the clones and the GD to fail so miserably, and he hadn't expected it, because his apprentice had failed to report to him that he had his own strike team assembled, that could rival the GD Council in its offensive power. Not one or two, but 6 fighters wielding red lightsabers had been witnessed at the battle. 2 were undoubtedly Dooku and Vader himself. One had been reported to be former GD Master Qui-Gon Jinn, who should have died years ago. Another one they hadn't been able to identify yet, but apparently the prisoner was a Zabrak. If Jinn hadn't died 10 years ago, chances were that Maul hadn't either. Sidious would have to confirm it, would have to send a message to the Night Mother asking if she gave away any other Force sensitives, but if Maul was alive. If Maul was alive, that meant he'd had help hiding himself from Sidious all this time. With the violent tendencies his former apprentice used to have, his hiding place had likely been an army. More precisely, Vader's army. Since Dooku still hadn't reported on the unknown other Dark GD, Sidious had to assume that he knew all along, and was hiding the knowledge on purpose. He was making his own preparations, using Vader to overthrow Sidious and take his place. The Sith Lord had expected something like this to happen soon. It was typical for his arrogant apprentice. His plan would fail, of course. 3 Sith that powerful couldn't possibly work together, not on a daily basis, not in a situation where they needed to trust each other not to stab them in the back. Their alliance would fall apart, and then all Sidious had to do was pick out the survivor for himself. In the meantime, he would have to work to undo the damage done to the Republic's public image and morals. Oh, and he had to deepen his relationship with Skywalker as a backup plan. Over the last years, Sidious hadn't gotten nearly as much contact with the young GD as he would have liked. He managed to install a friendly relationship with the boy, but whenever he tried to get a bit more private or get him to open up, he became reserved. At first, he hadn't understood why. It was the few times Skywalker had been honestly surprised that he didn't already know why he was acting the way he was that clued him in. Anakin was so used to talking to his father without actually talking to him, always careful not to give away anything too important, that he was naturally cautious with everyone else as well. Maybe Sidious would have been able to crack his shell by now if he hadn't been so distracted by Vader's doings. But this last revelation, the forming of an order of Dark GD, proved to him that Vader was not fit for the position of his apprentice. He was too dangerous. He wouldn't make the same mistake with the son. Palpatine had appointed Skywalker to guard duty for the young senator, and just as he'd hoped they had gotten closer. Maybe with time he'd get another leverage to hold over the boy. The plan had backfired, however, when Skywalker had freed Dukat Zabrak, his only lead on Maul's state, to exchange him for the girl. Not only that, but he had dared to claim he'd done so on the Senate's orders. Sidious had half a mind to deny it and get him expelled now, but his connection with him wasn't strong enough yet. He'd have to help him out, strengthen his belief that the GD were wrong, and that Palpatine was the only one who would help him. At the very least, Skywalker would owe him, and that was a beginning. Obi-Wan woke up with a start. Shock and fear still resided in his bones as he fought against his own blanket, eventually rolling from his bed and meeting the ground hard. Images of blood, burned bodies and lifeless eyes still flickered in his vision. It took him a couple of seconds in which he almost sliced a bookcase in half with his lightsaber, until he realized that it had only been a dream. A nightmare, but the most terrible he'd ever had. Oh force, he sighed and grabbed the bedpiece for support. He was irritated for a moment, not being able to feel the smooth wood under his fingers. His gaze was drawn to his hand. It looked normal, but he didn't have any feeling in it. It wasn't real. You can't close your eyes forever, Obi-Wan. The GD whirled around, his sword once again activated. Nobody should be in here with him. This was the GD temple, and nobody just walked in on a master. He was safe here. Of course, he still slept with a lightsaber under his pillow, and today, he was glad for it. His visitor, however, was someone entirely unexpected. Qui-Gon? He exclaimed in shock. That was not possible. Qui-Gon was dead. He killed him himself. He saw the life leave his eyes, felt their connection break. But it was Qui-Gon. Not only that, but it was the Qui-Gon he remembered. He couldn't feel the dark side anywhere around him, and he had that same calm smile, the same good-natured eyes as his old master. There was only one difference. He was blue. "You're dead," Obi-Wan said, his voice shaking. "I killed you." "Yes, you did. But there is no death, there is the Force. I have discovered the last secret, the true meaning behind the living Force, and now I am one with it, forever watching over the living." "No? No, that's a trick. You're your hollow image or an hallucination." Qui-Gon sighed, as if talking to a very stupid child. "Megan." The GD called out and grabbed a book from the bedside table. He threw it right at Qui-Gon's image. It went right through. There was no flicker, no disruption as there would have been with a hollow message, especially a recorded one. "Obi-Wan, I'm only here to help you." "Help me?" Obi-Wan practically screeched the words. He dropped his sword in favor of being able to pull at his own hair, trying to dispel this figment of his imagination through pain. "I killed you, why would you help me?" "Because you need my help," his old master replied, "more than anyone else. The Force is practically screaming it at you. You saw it yourself, didn't you, the destruction of the GD Order? I will stop it. I will stop it by fighting Vader and doing everything I can so no more GD will die in this war." Qui-Gon shook his head. "You don't understand. Vader isn't the reason for this. How would you know? Even if it was a vision and not just a dream, I never saw who killed him." "Did you? No, but then how would you know? How would you know that Vader isn't the one destroying the Order?" "I know it because he is the chosen one." Obi-Wan stared at him. "What? That's right. The ancient prophecy was talking about him. He is the favorite of the Force, the one who can break all the rules without having to fear the consequences. Tell me, have you ever in all those hours you mediated on his role, received any vision or advice? Have you ever received a single hint what Vader plans or how to fight him?" "No, he hadn't." Qui-Gon nodded as if answering his thoughts. "Neither have I. That is because the Force is stronger in him than in anyone else. The living Force is on his side and won't help anyone to take action against him. That is why I know that he is not to blame for the GD's destruction. If he were, the Force wouldn't have warned us." Obi-Wan turned away, not able to face the ghost anymore. "It's not possible," he muttered more to himself than anyone else. "It can't be." Obi-Wan knew that both light and dark side existed in the living Force, but he could not believe that the first one to discover its greatest secret should be a dark GD working for a Sith Lord. The ultimate acceptance of the Force was something every GD strove for. If Qui-Gon, who had always searched for ways to oppose the Order even before he'd left, was the first one to gain this acceptance, then it meant that the GD were wrong. It meant that Obi-Wan's entire world was built on false truths. That prospect was too horrible to even consider. "Obi-Wan," Qui-Gon whispered, and the GD thought he felt a light breeze. When he turned around, Qui-Gon had laid a hand on his shoulder. "Obi-Wan, I am sorry that we had to meet again like that. I truly am. I hope you would eventually see the truth, but I did not come here to convince you. Didn't you? Don't you just want me to what, get me to replace you or something?" "I supported Vader because he is the only one who can save the GD Order. He was a champion for the light side, and he was a champion for the dark side. The living Force will make sure that he wins, and I was only trying to get close to him to draw him back to the light. But instead you became dark yourself. I had to meet him halfway in order to reach him at all. He is not evil, Obi. He really does love his family. Well, he has an odd way of showing it, just as I love you. Because executing his own son isn't exact what. I love you, Obi-Wan, as if you were my own child. I admit that in the end I had almost forgotten how important that bond is. I want to apologize for the wounds I caused you, but I also need to warn you." "Warn me?" "Vader has a personal hatred for you, and now that he isn't bound to the promise he made to me, he will come after you. Not today and not tomorrow, but when he does get his hands on you, you will wish I would have killed you on Geonosis. How can he possibly have a personal hatred for me? I never did anything. You wouldn't believe me even if I told you. Maybe that has to do with all the lies coming out of your mouth. If you would just let me explain." "No, I don't want to hear anything of it. You may have used some kind of dark power to cheat death, but that does not excuse the things you did, and I won't be tricked into following your path." "Obi-Wan, no?" The GD turned away and grabbed another book, throwing it right through Qui-Gon's face. "Leave me alone." "But I don't want to hear it." Qui-Gon sighed again, deeper this time, and lowered the hand that had tried to reach out for his former Padawan. "Very well, if that is what you want," he replied. "I just want you to know one last thing. I forgive you." Obi-Wan pressed his eyes closed, his back turned to the apparition of his old master. There was something suspiciously wet in the corner of his eyes. "I have watched you these past weeks, watched you fighting your own demons, suffering under your guilt. You are the most stubborn student I ever had. Talented, intelligent, and oh so good with words. Still you are as steadfast and unyielding as the rest of the Order, and without the ability to bend and adapt, I fear you will be crushed under the waves of the coming war. The world needs people like you to build its foundations, but you are adhering to old and outdated beliefs. You are witnessing the end of an era. This war will burn down all the old buildings, even those with a foundation as strong as the GD Temple. If you want to survive, you have to stop grieving and blaming yourself and start to open your eyes and look at the world around you, or you'll miss it when it starts changing. I don't want to lose you again. Obi-Wan was silent for a couple of moments. There was such a huge lump in his throat, he simply could not speak. Finally he turned around, wanting to tell Qui-Gon just what he thought about his creffing forgiveness, but his master was nowhere to be seen anymore. Obi-Wan was alone in his room. XXX. Anakin had a strange dream. It was a sort of dream where you knew you were dreaming, but without the symbolism that often accompanied a Force vision. He was sitting on top of a mountain, looking down at a rich countryside that reminded him vaguely of Naboo. He wasn't in his own body either. Instead he seemed to be some kind of small animal. A lizard, most likely, judging from how good the sun felt on his skin. Suddenly, however, the sky darkened as thick rain clouds moved over it. A mighty roar could be heard, and Anakin raised his head to see a gigantic black dragon appear from a faraway mountain. The dragon began spitting fire at the cities below. Anakin was forced to watch as houses and people and animals alike began burning, and there was nothing he could do to help them. Then he heard the flapping of great wings and a powerful breeze almost knocked him off his rock. He looked around and saw an eagle with brown and white feathers land on a nearby low tree. At first he was afraid, thinking maybe the eagle would eat him, since he was currently a lizard, but it just regarded him with deep, strangely familiar eyes. "Hello Anakin," the eagle greeted him calmly. The GD was a bit too distracted by the sharp claws to notice the amusement in his eyes. "Who are you?" he wanted to know. "I am your master's former teacher, Qui-Gon Jinn." Or rather, the spirit of him. As it usually is in dreams, Anakin wasn't the least bit surprised. "What are you doing in my dream?" "I came to ask a favor of you. Obi-Wan is struggling with guilt after killing me. I tried to talk to him but he wouldn't listen." "That doesn't sound like him." Obi-Wan wasn't called the negotiator for nothing. He listened to other people 24/7. "Well, he got quite angry at me. It seems he blames everything bad that happens on Vader, and does not even want to consider I might have joined him for my own reasons. I'm afraid his feelings could lead to an unhealthy obsession, and I need you to protect him from such a fate." "Angry? My master?" Anakin repeated incredulously. "What did he do?" Qui-Gon sighed, which was a very odd sound for an eagle. "He threw a book at me," he admitted. "Twice." Anakin snorted. "So that's why you came to me in a dream when I'm a helpless lizard." "That was pure coincidence," Qui-Gon defended himself. "Although that is some pretty nice symbolism you got here." He turned his head to watch the roaring dragon in the distance. "I can assure you however that the difference in power level between the two of you is not as big as you think." Anakin didn't understand. "Symbolism? Forget about it. I just need you to keep an eye on Obi-Wan." "Do you think you can do that?" "Of course," Anakin answered. "I'm doing that anyway." But there was something else he had wanted to ask, but he got distracted so easily. "Right, how is it that you talk to him at all? Or me for that matter? Upon my death I became part of the living force. But you went dark, didn't you? You don't have to be light to become part of the force, for it includes both the light and the dark side. You have to accept who you are and what the force is. Light and dark is always present. How much they show in the living word is only dependent on the people." "Wait, so are you kinda immortal now? Please tell me you didn't teach my father this stuff." "No," Qui-Gon answered, and Anakin let out a breath of relief. That was before the eagle continued. "He knew it already before I met him." "You've got to be kidding me." "Unfortunately, no. I don't want my father to die, I think. I most certainly don't want to be the one who kills him. But I don't think the galaxy will survive having to endure him forever either. Though, he will die, eventually. Force spirits can only talk to other Force sensitives. But with an unlimited knowledge of the future and as much presence as he would still have in this form, he could still do some serious damage if he so chooses." "Great. So basically you're telling me we're doomed either way." "On the contrary. No fate is set in stone, Anakin. Vader is the living proof of that. Whatever plan the world has for the GD, the Sith and everyone else, Vader can change it with but a single decision. I believe we both agree that it would be irresponsible to turn the galaxy over to his moods like that. His role is one of a kind, but of all people you, Anakin, are the only one who has a chance of changing his mind and directing his power in controlled ways." "No pressure, huh?" the lizard replied dryly. "But how do I know the right direction?" "Obi-Wan will tell you," Qui-Gon said. "But only if he doesn't lose his own way. He needs you as much as you need him. You have to take care of him." "I will," Anakin promised. "I won't let him down." The unlike you went unspoken. "That's all I can ask for," the eagle replied. Then he raised his head to the sky, musing. "It is time for you to wake up, young GD." Down in the valley, the black dragon had set most of the landscape aflame by now. The fire was roaring high, so high it seemed to reach the sky itself. Clouds swirled around, the heat from the earth disrupting the weather and calling forth a storm. In no time the world around the small lizard fell apart as the eagle took flight. With the start, Anakin woke up. He was sweating, his hands shaking, and there was an annoying ring in his ear. At least he could do something about the last one. Still tired, the GD reached out to shut off the alarm. It was then that he remembered which day it was. Today he'd have his trial. He was to step in front of the council and explain why he thought it was a good idea to free a prisoner with important information about the war that had officially started when the inhabitants of over 30 systems had rebelled against the people of their republic outposts or governments, all under the flag of the newly found Confederacy of Independent Systems. Not surprisingly, most of them had been under the unofficial rule of some sort of criminals who were reported to belong to Vader's network. Anakin's solo mission could be considered an act of treason, but there were several things that stood in his favor. First of all, he was a GD. He was supposed to protect the peace, and organizing an exchange of prisoners to save his senator was certainly more in his line of duties than letting that prisoner be tortured for information. Then there was the fact that he had never been officially released from his mission to protect Padme Amidala with any means necessary. Padme of course had emphasized this point, saying that he had still acted as her bodyguard. The GD had been in charge of the military assault on Geonosis, but after their failure, the Senate seriously considered refusing them control of the clone army. Luckily the Chancellor was one of the people supporting Anakin's decision. According to him, he had had to decide whose command to follow, the GD's council or the Senate's. He had decided to further serve the Republic government, and that certainly could not be called treason. As such, Anakin had been discharged from all accusations by the law. That did not mean, however, that he wasn't going to face disciplinary measures from the GD order. At first he thought that his ruffled state was simply his own nervousness. There were lingering faint reminders of a nightmare at the edges of his consciousness, but he couldn't dwell on that much longer. Anakin would be dang it if he was late today. He'd already had his trial. Today he would listen to the council's decision of what to do with him. It was entirely possible that they would expel him. It was within their rights. Anakin had been well aware of that when he'd freed the Sith. He just hadn't cared. He still found it hard to regret his choice, even if they did throw him out. Anakin had talked about it with Padme. He had never thought he'd have any chance to be together with her, but after Geonosis, let's just say he'd gained new hope. 2 months ago the prospect of being expelled would have horrified him. Now, it didn't. Now, he had someone to go to. Someone other than his crazy warmongering father. He would stay with the GD if they allowed it. He would stay as long as he could, but Padme was now his first priority. He would stay with her no matter what. He would protect her. He promised. But even though the young senator was becoming increasingly important to him with each passing day, he still had other friends that he didn't want to abandon. Like Obi-Wan. Especially Obi-Wan. Anakin scowled, feeling as if he was missing something. Obi-Wan could look out for himself, couldn't he? Then why did he suddenly feel that strong urge to see after him? For a second the image of an eagle flashed in front of his inner eye, but it didn't make much sense to him. Whatever. He would accept the council's decision, and if it was to expel him, well, there was a war coming. The army would need talented pilots, and he was sure he could make it into Obi-Wan's squad, even if he wasn't his student anymore. Anakin made himself ready for the day and headed for the council's chambers. He was half an hour early and waited for his master to arrive, but he didn't show. That made him scowl. His master had promised that he'd be here today to support him. While he agreed that the exchange had been necessary, he wasn't particularly happy about the way Anakin had gone about it. According to him, it was a small miracle that he hadn't been caught and held prisoner himself. When he'd said that Vader would most likely not try to kill him, and thus he would be a valuable asset in the war, which was really only another word for tool, he hadn't meant he should exploit his position like that. It could easily backfire and make people question his loyalties. Time was up and Obi-Wan still wasn't there. Meanwhile Obi-Wan Kenobi stood in a small platform in one of the towers of the GD temple, looking down on Coruscant. He would have preferred to just stay in his bed all day, but found out he couldn't stand being in his room right now. It was as if the presence of his dead master still lingered there. It was crazy. Obi-Wan had no reason to feel guilty about Qui-Gon's death. He'd been a traitor. He'd lost his way. It was mercy of him to end his suffering, a favor to the image of his old master, a true GD. Obi-Wan had done the right thing. Then why, just why did it feel so wrong? Obi-Wan sighed and stared at the sun climbing up the sky. Suddenly there was something ringing in the back of his mind. He quickly checked his watch and suppressed a curse. He had lost track of time. Anakin should be with the council now. They would decide where his future was going to lead him, and Obi-Wan was supposed to be there. He had promised. Immediately the GD felt bad as he made his way down the stairs. His Padawan was in trouble, might even get expelled, and he wasn't there to support him. What kind of rubbish master was he? Could it be that he was somehow cursed, that he had some kind of bad influence on people, that both his Padawan and his master had disobeyed the GD council? Obi-Wan didn't make it in time. When he got to the chambers, the doors were just opening, a stream of people coming out. He spotted Anakin amongst them and immediately felt relieved to see he didn't look devastated. A little confused maybe, but not as if his whole world had just been crushed. Anakin, he called out, and the boy caught his eyes, smiling weakly. I'm sorry I wasn't here earlier, he apologized at once. It's okay, Anakin replied to his surprise. He had half expected him to complain, to look at him with those hurt eyes, and make him hate himself even more. I know you've been somewhat distracted lately. I am sorry, he just repeated, at a loss of words. I should have been there, as your master. Well, you're not my master anymore, Anakin returned. An ice-cold feeling suddenly spread in his stomach. What? He managed to get out. I'm not your Padawan anymore. I'm not anyone's Padawan. Oh my god, Obi-Wan thought. They expelled him. I'm a fully fledged Jedi Knight now. What? You're not very creative today, are you? I am sorry, this is just unexpected. Anakin huffed. I should have been promoted a week ago according to schedule. The council let me get away with a warning and decided not to take back their offer. On Obi-Wan's face the first true smile in weeks appeared. That's great news, Anakin. I'm really happy for you. When is the ceremony? No ceremony. It was an on-the-spot promotion. I guess they don't want me to think I'm getting rewarded for breaking the rules. Then you got off lightly, I guess. They don't want me to go and take part in any fighting though. Instead I'm going on a bunch of diplomatic missions trying to convince our allies that we have a chance of winning this disaster of a war. That's a lot of responsibility. It's not. They just want to test my patience. It's not like it's a secret that I hate politics. I would rather fight up front, but according to Master Yoda, I can be trusted with the lives of soldiers. He scrunched up his face as if he had tasted something bad. This is a job for you. Thanks, Anakin. You know how I mean it. You're the one who's good at talking. Besides, I'm not sure we actually can defeat Vader. I mean, have you seen his fleet? That's a pretty dang impressive ship he's got there. How can I convince a bunch of lazy politicians that they're not going to be blasted into pieces when I don't believe it myself? Or would like to join in on the fun, but he didn't say that aloud. You will just have to patient, Obi-Wan said. Trust in the Force and let it guide you. The light will always win over the dark, as long as we are strong and determined. If you say so. Obi-Wan smiled slightly and laid a hand on his former Padawan's shoulder. I believe in you, Anakin. You will make a great knight. We will need you at the front soon enough. You should enjoy the little peace you have as long as you can. Anakin's face lit up somewhat. You know what? You're right. Maybe some time spent traveling around will do me good after all. I'm happy to help. Obi-Wan answered, somewhat thrown off by the sudden change of mood. He didn't know that Anakin was already planning his first diplomatic trip to Naboo. He wanted to make sure that Padme was fine. There had been so little opportunities to see her during the last weeks. He wanted to ensure that their new relationship that he had worked and suffered so hard for wouldn't die out. Maybe he could visit her on Naboo, spend some more time with her, maybe searching for a ring. Anakin started himself at that last though, but soon after, a silly smile spread on his face. Yes, that was a great idea. It had been so hard to get her to admit her feelings for him. He wouldn't let her go now, or ever. He wanted to be with her forever. Love had done crazy things to his head. It would be complicated now that he wasn't going to get expelled after all, but he was sure he could make it. He wasn't ever letting her get away from him. 2 months later, Anakin Skywalker smiled happily as he looked down on the soft body next to him. There was nothing better to start a morning than waking up next to his love. Her dark hair was messily spread over the pillow. A soft sigh escaped his angel as she slowly woke up as well. Padme's hand searched for him absent-mindedly even before she opened her eyes. Anakin planted a light kiss on her temple, making sure she knew he was still there. Good morning, my angel, he whispered into her ear. Padme began to smile immediately. Seeing her like this, it still made his heart flutter. Gods, how he loved this woman. On some days, it was still hard to believe that she was his woman, his wife. Yes, they had married in secret, and it wasn't, strictly speaking, a legal marriage. Well, it was on Naboo, but it wouldn't be recognized anywhere else. Ani, Padme greeted him warmly and kissed him lightly. I'm glad you're still here. I wasn't sure, you said you had to leave early in the morning. He just made, not wanting to be reminded of that. Still have time for breakfast, he decided then. You sure? She asked teasingly and kissed him again. And again. And the calf might be enough, Anakin admitted and sunk back into the pillows. The newlyweds took another 20 minutes to get their calf. I bet you're excited to return to the front, Padme said when they were both seated at the table. But please do be careful, will you? War is a terrible thing, and this one is going to get out of control soon. Of course I'll be careful, Anakin promised lightly. I'm just glad I can stop sitting through those boring meetings. The council had allowed him to return to active duty, since his diplomacy missions had gone surprisingly well. It was really only thanks to Padme's advice. Of course Anakin would have much preferred to carry his diplomatic missions to the Confederacy itself, doing some aggressive negotiations instead of traveling around the galaxy and dissipating the worries of Republican planets about their army strength. Actually, chances are the council will only send me to some remote locations, fighting against droids. If they have their will, I'm never going to encounter Sith. Which is a good thing, Padme scolded, noting his annoyed tone. I would worry endlessly about you. But Padme, how am I supposed to ever get strong enough to stand up to my father if I'm never challenged? You can't always count on him letting you go, Ani. Anakin looked affronted. I'm not. This is not a game. It's not right for the two of you to use the galaxy as playground to reconcile your differences. I know it isn't, but Vader doesn't. I'm afraid it doesn't matter if you want to fight him or not. Even if you are stationed on a remote planet, he will just relocate his war there. He's crazy, Anakin. I spoke to him and he was only talking nonsense. I don't even think he recognized me. Okay, but that can be a good thing, can't it? I mean, he will make mistakes. He will be unpredictable. She sighed. You already have a plan how to get assigned to the most dangerous battlefields, don't you? Anakin smiled somewhat sheepishly. I might have thought of something. What is it? I'm going to get myself a Padawan. The council might get away with sending a fresh knight off to the Outer Rim, but 2 GD. That would be a waste. You need 2 to go against the Sith, 2, 1 to duel the enemy and 1 to lead the rest of the army. But Anakin, do you think you can do that? To care for your own student and in such dangerous times? The Padawans are all sent to the dangerous fields. Mine would be the safest with me since I would actually look out for him or her. Besides, all the other GD who were knighted at the same time as me already have their own Padawan. I'm going to give the council the benefit of the doubt and say it's because I was on diplomatic missions and there doesn't really happen anything that'd make it possible to teach someone. I rather think they just don't trust me with something like that, but one can hope. I'm sorry, Anakin, Padme said, knowing how much it hurt her husband that the GD didn't believe in him. It's alright. As long as I have you, I can take whatever they'll throw at me. He returned and gave her another kiss. XXX. Count Dooku entered the bridge of the Executor feeling tired. It had taken him 2 days to travel here, and that even though he was stuck in mountains of work leading the Confederacy, he didn't understand why he couldn't simply make a holo call for this, as he did with the commander droids, Grievous and Ventress. Vader said that information so secret only the Sith could know about it, should only be delivered by one and only in person, so nobody could hijack the message. Personally, Dooku thought he just didn't like talking via holo. At least Vader was working. He was scanning a list of names and faces, some of which Dooku knew to be bounty hunters. Lord Vader, he greeted, receiving a cool nod in return. A bit irritated by the lack of vocal answer, he asked, "Is there a reason why Master Plo Koon is playing a board game in his cell with the Red Lady?" Vader barely looked up. "It serves the analysis of the GD's battle strategies." "How did you find out?" "The holding cells were on my way here had one of the guards I asked for news asked me if I was there to lead the interrogation. However, now I'm not even certain if you ever plan to assign one. You don't know how hard it was to get him to play with the ship's computer in the first place. I had to threaten to execute one of his clone-troopers for every denied or lost game. I'll take a look at him later. Now what do you have for me?" Dooku handed over a small data stick. After plugging it into the console, a number of holo images appeared. They were of different GD, a total number of 30 knights with their respective Padawans. These are the newly recruited GD. The information was gathered in battles all over the galaxy. None of these, he pointed to the Padawans, appear in our system, so they must be new. "I see. Well, there should be 1 or 2 that we can win over for our side," Vader said, scrolling through the images of the young people. "Oh? What is this?" he muttered when suddenly he came across a familiar face. "I expected you would find this interesting," Dooku noted. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing, for now. I want to see how this develops." However, these, he marked another 5 young GD that he had vague recollections of being troublemakers, we can concentrate on. We will wait another month at the least, let them get used to the war. The droids will sample information about their behavior, their character, their bonds to their masters. We should be ready to harvest our first students in 7 weeks. They continued to discuss what little information they had about the Padawans, and who would get to worry about which name on the list. 20 minutes later, Dooku left the bridge again. As soon as he was out of sight, Vader put aside his work and called for a holographic Jared board. "Come mother, play with me," he said, and instantly, the red holo image of the Executor's soul sat down opposite of him. "You have no chance against me," she boasted. "I'm better than you. I beat you the last 3 times. Only because you cheated. Half of your moves were not within the rules. It's a game simulating a battle. Improvising in battle is my specialty. Besides, you're not supposed to play as a computer, but as a GD. I'm not a GD, she huffed insulted. I know that, but I want to play against one, and you're the only one who can simulate their style." The mother rolled her eyes. "You did pay attention to Master Koon's playing style, didn't you?" "Of course I did. He wasn't really a challenge though. If you send me down there one more time, we'll run out of clone troopers to kill. Well, we'll have to risk it. Now let's begin." XXX. Darth Vader stood on the bridge of the Executor, and happily watched the moon burn that used to house one of the biggest fuel storages the Republic possessed. It was a great victory and a hard-earned one too. Only 2 Star Destroyers had accompanied the Executor. 3 ships to take out a guard of 10 circling the moon. For once the odds hadn't been in his favor, and Vader had genuinely enjoyed the challenge. However, he hadn't gotten away without a scratch. "Damage report," he demanded into the empty air. Next to him, the red image of the mother appeared. 3 of my ion cannons have been destroyed," she began seriously but not overly concerned. "The port side shield reactors are damaged, leaving a great area unprotected. Due to this, Sector 4D is suffering from great damage to the outer mantle. 74 droids of Category 5 and 6 have been lost, as well as 2 human crew members. Also, the hyperdrive is damaged. My sensors have caught a message from the enemy calling for backup. I suggest a retreat before the place is swarming with Republic ships. How fast can you exchange the damaged hyperdrive against the spare one? The astromech team can do it within 20 minutes. Then we'll have to play for time. Tell General Savage that he is to cover our site until we can raise the deflector shields again. Maul's ship took a greater beating. Tell him to retreat into hyperspace. Done. Show me a map. The mother raised her arms, and a glimmering holo map of the battlefield appeared between them. Darth Vader watched the movements of the enemy ships for a couple of seconds. We'll attack this cruiser, he decided finally, pointing at one at the left but near the middle. You want to charge right at their head? The mother asked skeptically. Do you want to kill me or something? Vader almost smiled. If we stay where we are, they'll rip us apart. We would have to spend too much energy on the repairs and evasion maneuvers to strengthen the deflector shields. That way there's a danger to your main reactor, and I don't have to tell you what's going to happen if they hit it. The GD think I'm a mad Sith. They have not realized yet that the battlefield is my life. They'll think my victory got to my head, and that I'm recklessly attacking their strong point. At the same time, however, they won't dare to fire at your reactor. If we force them into close combat, the explosion would destroy them as well. That will hurt, the mother complained. The things I do for you, it's unbelievable. By now Savage's Star Destroyer was in position. How do you know the cruisers won't just sacrifice themselves to destroy me? The mother asked. I am the flagship of the Separatist Alliance after all. I know it, Vader returned, because Anakin is in charge of that fleet. Oh? Are you sure? Yes, I can feel his presence. He would allow his division to die this easily, even if it means letting his enemy get away. Sir? The mother called out suddenly, my tractor beam has caught an unidentified ship. What? Are they sending out starfighters? No sir. It seems to be a small transport ship. It still hasn't called, I think it's from the Republic. It could be they're trying to get me to swallow a bomb. Which hangar? 78F. That's too far away at the edge to do any damage with a bomb. Send out a human to investigate together with a couple of droids, and let them check for life forms. As an afterthought he added. When I say check I mean scan thoroughly, not just look left and right. Make sure they do it right. The mother relayed his orders and 5 minutes later, she reported, the group has caught a trespasser. It's a woman, lightly armed. There seems to be nobody else on board except for a protocol droid. Vader looked up, alarmed. Give me an image. The mother held up her hand and a holo image, sent to her by the visual sensors of one of the battle droids, appeared. Vader's lips formed her name soundlessly. He remembered this. He remembered how Padme had been caught, but it had been on General Grievous's ship, and it wasn't supposed to happen for a couple of weeks. He had saved her of course, and destroyed Grievous's flagship in the process, even though the droid general had been able to escape. Of course now it would never happen since Vader had the absolute control over the fleet, not Dooku, and though Grievous was one of his generals, he never sent him anywhere where he really needed something to get done. The man wasn't of much use for anything but providing a distraction. The last time around, he had barely had time to ask himself just why the Senator's ship had gotten lost and landed in the middle of the battle. It wasn't the first time during the war he'd had to save her, and it wasn't the last. Now looking back, Vader was almost certain that Sidious had been the one manipulating her ship. He'd sent her to Grievous so the general could use her as a hostage and make a safe escape. But Vader knew better than to think Sidious had done it to help him. Senator Amidala is not to be harmed, he commanded harshly. Take her to the officer lounge. I want the room cleared. What about her ship? What condition is it in? Well, it bumped onto my surface once in an attempt to evade my tractor beam. The damage is extensive enough that a few TIE fighters would have no trouble shooting her down, and I doubt it would survive a hyper jump, but there is still a certain danger she could flee with it. Well, then send someone to repair it, he said. I'm sorry, I think something is wrong with my auditory sensors. Did you just say to repair it? That's right. But that's my daughter-in-law we're talking about. You'll take care of her ship for me. You're? Oh, I understand. In that case, I'll make sure her ship is being repaired. It could probably use some fuel too. Don't go too overboard. I don't want her to know I'm letting her go. Just repair the worst damage so she can make a lucky escape. The mother vanished when he dismissed her with a gesture. Vader walked towards the lounge his officers sometimes rested in. It was the nicest room on the entire ship, with red soft armchairs and a couch, and even a fully equipped bar. Normally there were waiter droids around as well, but the room had been cleared as per his commands. He didn't have to wait long before one of his officers entered the lounge, accompanied with 3 battle droids, not the pathetic yellow junk, but heavily armored ones with updated programming. He'd gotten an overhaul by Vader himself. My lord, this is the trespasser that has been caught at Hangar 78F. I see. I will be taking over from here. The officer excused himself, taking the droids with him. Darth Vader turned around to face the young senator for the second time in 3 months. As usual, she took his breath away. She was beautiful. Even though she wasn't wearing any fancy gown but practical leather trousers and a vest, even though her hair was in a simply ponytail and she wasn't wearing any makeup, she was unable to cover up her natural beauty. Her fair skin, her dark eyelashes, her soft hair and her defiant eyes, everything on her drew him in. Vader compassed himself and straightened his back. Senator Amidala. It's a pleasure to meet you again, he greeted her politely. Vader, she answered with a scowl, her lips thin in displeasure, and Vader barely caught himself before he ducked his head, remembering that look and the tirade that would follow it most times. Force, how he had missed her. Darth Vader raised his hand, ignoring her flinch and the small painful stab he felt at it, and used the Force to get rid of the shackles binding her hands behind her back. If you'd have a moment, Senator, I would like for you to join me for a cup of tea. Padme followed him to the bar reluctantly. He'd already had tea prepared by a droid. She took the cup from him with thanks, but didn't actually drink anything. May I ask what brings you to my beloved ship this time around? He asked, layering on the charm without even wanting to. He knew he shouldn't interact with her. He'd almost lost himself the last time around. But he missed her. She remained stiff of course, watching him warily. It's just an unfortunate accident, I'm afraid. I see. Vader faked a sigh. Your presence here puts me in quite a predicament. How so? Well, it would be stupid to just let you go. I am currently outnumbered and your presence ensures my safe retreat. At the same time I greatly dislike having to rely on a hostage for this. Especially when my son would hate me for threatening. You are still friends with Anakin, aren't you? Had looked slightly taken aback, as if she hadn't expected him to mention Anakin. I might be, she admitted. However, I find it surprising that you would care. Why wouldn't I? Well, Anakin is a Jedi, and you are very well known to be a Sith. Vader scowled at her. He told you about the ancient enmity between our orders then. I'll let you know that my political or religious views have nothing to do with the management of my family. But from your words, I'd almost think you didn't know that Anakin and I have been in contact with each other all the time during his Jedi training. Padme's eyes widened, her sweet little mouth forming a little O. Vader was puzzled. Why wouldn't Anakin tell her? It wasn't like Padme didn't know that he was the son of a Sith Lord, she had been his guest before. He had thought for sure that Anakin would go to her when he'd felt so betrayed after Geonosis, that he would mourn over their lost relationship. Tentatively Vader touched her mind. It was well protected of course, but he could feel her connection to Anakin, and since their Force presence was practically identical, it was easy to just link himself to it, to travel along that connection and into her mind. She really had not known. Anakin had never outright denied having had contact, but he had always made it appear as if he'd never heard anything from him until that day on Geonosis. He had downplayed the betrayal and desperation he'd felt and pretended he hadn't been under constant watch for nearly all his life from the Jedi for this same connection. He didn't take too well to my actions on Geonosis. I haven't heard from him ever since, he hurried to say, just in case she thought Anakin was a spy, which he was most certainly not. But if you still care about him, why are you fighting against the Republic? She wanted to know. He never told you. Again, Vader had to scowl. What kind of friend is he? He really should put more trust in you. Adam continued to look confused, but not quite as wary anymore, so he continued. I told him, then I will repeat it to you now. The Republic's government is utterly corrupt. It's not just bribed senators either, it's the Sith. Count Dooku and his master are the last Sith that remain from an old, outdated order that I plan to replace with my own. Right now they are playing with the world, each of them leading one side of the war. It doesn't matter if the Separatists get defeated or the Republic, either way, the Sith win. It is war itself that they crave. Now I had to choose one side in this war, knowing that the side I stood on would eventually win it. I chose the side with the weaker Sith because it will be easy to remove him from his position within the Separatist Council. All I have to do is reveal his connection to the Master that is hiding in your Senate. That's impossible. Padme protested. There isn't a Sith in the Senate. Who do you think caused your little accident today? Who passed all those bills that lead to the rebellion of the trading guilds? Who pushed for the creation of a military? Who started this war? It was the Senate. His beautiful angel was trembling now. But who would do something like that? I'm afraid I can't tell you the identity, he replied, truly regretting it. I can't allow you to arrest him. Aside from the fact that he would probably get away anyway, I want to have his head for myself. But I do advise you to watch out and to trust nobody within the Senate. It could be anybody. I have to tell Anakin, the Jedi have to know. Oh, but the Jedi do know, he stopped her. We told them, both Kenobi and Anakin, they didn't believe it, didn't want to believe it. They don't believe that I am no part of the Sith Order, an order that traditionally only has 2 members. They think I am the Sith Master and Dooku my apprentice, or the other way around. In their defense, the Zabrak brothers specialized on lightsaber dueling. They could use the Force, but they mostly used it to strengthen their bodies, and thus they couldn't be identified as Sith on first sight. They believe I merely want to distract them and cause mistrust in their allies. Even if they did believe it, they are restricted by their Jedi code, by all their rules, regulations, and morals, that they wouldn't be able to do something about it. They also believed that Vader was merely hungry for power, that he wanted to conquer the galaxy because that was easier, then believed that he would break loose of war and rip apart the galaxy, all to kill one man. As if she was reading his thoughts, Padme asked. Well, why do you do it? Why do you fight in this war if you could challenge this Sith directly? He smiled cruelly. I did just tell you that the Sith crave war. I may have a personal dislike for this man, but I do want my victory to be absolute. Therefore, I want to destroy not only him but all of his forces. He tilted his head, noticing her horrified expression. Fear not, Melody, as you are one of the very few pure persons within the Senate, you have absolutely nothing to fear from me. But do you understand now the predicament I'm in? My greatest rival sent me a nice way to get out of this battle, wrapped up in such a beautiful specimen. I suppose, officially, we do have a temporary alliance, but his lack of faith in my abilities is insulting. Furthermore, he is trying to drive Anakin apart from me by forcing me to take you as a hostage. Such manipulations are so typical for him. At the same time, if I let you go, the Separatist Council could see it as an act of betrayal. Then what will you do? Padmas, swallowing thickly. I'll wait for Anakin to rescue you. It would be nice if you altered your report a bit, making it as if you had barely escaped. Anakin doesn't need even more attention on his person, and I would have an easier time explaining your departure. Would that be agreeable? Hesitantly, she nodded, barely believing her luck. Good. How's our situation? The last words were spoken into the empty air. The voice of the mother answered him. There has been another trespasser who could be identified as General Skywalker. We have 56 causalities so far. He got lost in sectors searching for the senator, and I took the liberty of knocking him out with sleeping gas. The cruisers have temporarily stopped firing, but a group of starfighters is attacking my damaged deflector shields. I have concentrated all energy on destroying them, but they are clearly only here to buy time for the general. Vader shook his head, smiling fondly at his son's antics. Very well, show him in. He turned towards Padme. This is an excellent opportunity. I still have an axe to grind with him. Anakin Skywalker was dragged into the room by a small battalion of droids, who dropped him on the ground by the door, and handed his lightsaber to Vader. One of them injected him with some adrenaline, and he woke up with a start, immediately jumping to his feet. Vader sent the droids away and turned towards his younger self. With an inviting gesture he said, "How nice of you to come here, Anakin. Come and join us for tea, will you?" The young man looked confused and disorientated for a moment. "Padme," he finally called out, quickly moving towards her, grabbing her shoulders. "Is everything alright? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Jedi Knight Skywalker, everything is okay," she reassured him. Anakin whirled around to Vader, anger glinting in his eyes. "I would allow you to do anything to her. No need to get so excited, son." Anakin had tried to call his saber back with the Force, but Vader held against it. "I don't think you should be allowed to have that right now. Give me back my weapon." "Why should I? You can at least face me like a man and fight me. Do you think you can defeat me? Do you think you can kill me?" Vader saw him hesitating and whirled around the stolen lightsaber in his hand with a smirk. "Nobody has to get hurt, Anakin. I just want you to join me." "No, I'll never join you. Skywalker, just do what he said," Padme said. "It's just Eve. Try to be diplomatic, will you?" Vader felt like laughing as he saw the incredulous look on his son's face. "She's right," he said. "No need to be afraid of a little tea." Anakin looked helplessly from Vader to his wife before he reluctantly sat down next to Padme. "There's something I wanted to ask you for quite some time," Darth Vader said calmly. "When are you two going to get married?" Padme choked on the tea she had been sipping at, and Anakin imitated a fish for a few seconds. "What? Well, it's obvious the way you came rushing in here on your own to save her that the senator is very important to you, and the way she called you Skywalker just now, as if to remind you that you have to play your roles in public. That is ridiculous," Padme declared. "We are most certainly not going to get married." "What? Then I've already missed the wedding." Vader leaned closer with a scowl. "And you didn't invite me?" he asked in obviously fake exasperation. "Father," Anakin protested, unconsciously falling back into the habits of his youth, when Vader used to tease him about his infatuation with the girl. "It's not like that between us. I'm a Jedi after all." "Don't try to deny your feelings, Anakin," Vader lectured him. "If you bottle them up like that, they're just gonna explode in your face someday. Believe me, I know what I'm talking about." He turned to look at Padme again. "You didn't answer my question. Why was I not invited to the wedding? Why would we invite you?" Anakin asked angrily. "You tried to kill us on Geonosis." "Oh, so there was a wedding. Was it beautiful, Father?" But his words had managed to bring a tiny smile on Padme's lips, a smile that made him feel all warm inside. Having a family had never felt better to him. "I don't even know why you're so upset," Vader said to his son. "I didn't try to kill you on Geonosis. I tried to save you. You put us into an arena so we would be eaten by those foul beasts. You're my son, Anakin. I expect you to be able to get rid of a few animals. The Geonosians demanded your death for destroying their factory. I'm in charge of the Separatists' military. I don't make their laws. The most I could do was to alter the sentence so they'd make it a public execution. The Geonosians have laws for those that if the convict survives the trial, he or she may be pardoned. If the Jedi hadn't intervened, all three of you would have been allowed to go, and this war would never have begun." Anakin looked confused again. He'd been so sure in his hatred for Vader. He remembered being like that, so moody and ready to change his mind at every turn. The Sith ignored him and turned back to his wife. "I do expect pictures, you know." It's the least you can do. I am not sure if that's such a great idea, Padme answered hesitantly. People would probably consider it a scandal. And doesn't that show perfectly what's wrong with this world? If the Republic can be outraged at a marriage between a GD and a senator, while they have such a huge war being fought right in front of their doors. You can't do that, Anakin called out hotly. You can't just act as if nothing has happened. We're at war, we're in the middle of a battle. We can't just joke around together at a time like this. I believe it is the best time to joke around, Vader muttered, not understanding why his son didn't share his sense of humor. Would you like it better if I put you in a holding cell and have you tortured by my droids for information? I can do that too, you know. We would very much prefer if you didn't, Padme hurried to say. Thank you, Senator. At least someone here agrees with me. I know perfectly well the situation we're in. I probably understand it better than you do. But, as I said before, my political views have nothing to do with the way I manage my family. Anakin, you could become a Genie Master and replace Yoda as the head of the council, and I would still love you. It wouldn't stop me from attacking Coruscant and killing every GD you sent to oppose me, but I would never let you or your beautiful wife die, not if there's anything I could do about it. And there happens to be a lot of Sith like me could do about that. He tilted his head. Of course, it's not like you ever will become a GD Master. I don't have to become a master, Anakin said with a scowl. I could be degraded to Padawan again, and would still be 10 times the man you are. Vader furrowed his brow. That had not been the answer he'd expected. He had meant to explain to his younger self just why he would never become a master, thus lessening the blow when he was refused the position. He hadn't expected Anakin to be so accepting of his fate. Being a man would imply being human, Vader answered instead. Which is something the GD are not allowed to be, if I remember correctly. Just because we treat all beings fairly does not mean we can't feel compassion. Or attachments. Vader added, looking pointedly at the senator. Anger rose in his younger self. I never said I was a good GD, but any GD is better than a Sith. Darth Vader shook his head. I don't understand how you can even stand being around those people. They have absolutely no respect for you. You know, the GD would never promote you as long as I'm still breathing. They might even make defeating me your trial of fire, the final test for your loyalty. The GD greatly underestimate my power. They'd ask the impossible of you. Unless you wait until I'm a weak old man, there wouldn't be a chance that you'll ever defeat me, not as you are now, not as a GD. Of course it would be different if you use the dark side, but in order to do that you'd have to really hate me, and you can't use the dark side, thus becoming a Sith while hating me for doing the exact same thing. Therefore, you will never become a GD Master, even if you get just as powerful as all the other Masters. He tilted his head to the side as a thought crossed his mind. Except of course you want to use the dark side and become a Sith to defeat, but not actually kill me and remain a GD. You're already living a double life with your wife anyway, so why not take over the GD Council as a secret Sith Lord? Now that I think about it, that is an incredibly entertaining thought. You know, I might even help you with that. We could stage an epic battle and… Absolutely not. But no? Oh, come on. Vader's personal calming came to life in that moment, and he clapped it onto his ear, so he could hear the mother's voice. Sir, the Dawnstar has been destroyed without much retribution from the other cruisers. The hyperdrive is repaired and ready to go. The coordinates are set. It seems our time is up, he said aloud, setting aside his tea. It was great getting to meet you two again, but since I'm sure your people have already called for reinforcements and my mission here is completed anyway, I will take my leave now. My men will bring you back to your ship. With a sharp glance to Anakin he added. Don't even try to break loose and do something stupid, like destroy the main reactor. This ship is highly sensitive, and I give her permission to turn the entire floor you're on into a vacuum if you don't behave. You let us go? Anakin asked incredulously. Just like that. You prefer the torture in the dark cell. Can't you just say thank you and be done with it? Thank you, Lord Vader, Padme cut in. We will accept your generous offer. She shot Anakin a dark look that managed to shut him up. Well, she's got manners. You've made a great choice with this beautiful lady, son. Thank you, he ground out. The next time you invade my ship, he said, I expect you to not. And to not get defeated so easily. I'll keep your lightsaber as a little reminder. Maybe it will teach you a lesson. The door opened to reveal one of Vader's officers. The Sith couldn't resist to plant a kiss on Padme's hand as he said his goodbye, which caused her to blush and Anakin to glare at him so fiercely Vader actually felt invisible hands around his throat. He was more amused than anything else at this uncontrolled attempt to intimidate him, and just to show how it was really done, he flared his own power and tightened his grip on the Force, using it to ruffle Anakin's hair affectionately but menacingly at the same time. The couple left in Padme's ship, and Vader knew that he had utterly confused them. He'd all but declared himself to be a bloodthirsty monster in one moment, but swore his love for his son in the next. They didn't know which one to believe. That was because neither she nor Anakin or any other Sith or GD could ever understand that he was both a cruel warrior and a loving father. That was what he was. He embodied both the light and the dark side. He was a perfect balance. It was a dangerous balance, of course, a small catwalk over the vast abyss of madness, and occasionally Vader would look down into that abyss, and the madness would look back, tugging at his sanity, whispering to him, offering its company. And on some days, it was tempting, because despite all his efforts he was still alone. He had gone to save everybody, but there was nobody left to save him, and when the Force, neither light nor dark side, would offer him any comfort anymore, then at least his own mind, twisted and broken as it was, always would. He knew he was getting close. Looking into Padme's mind had made it obvious to him. Her mind was like a small, homey house where every memory and every thought had its place. Anakin's mind, it was almost funny now that he thought about it, considering his mind had been like that once as well, was like a galaxy full of stars and planets and moons, and you had to use all of your imagination just to cross those ridiculous distances. Vader knew how, of course, knew he could jump from one thought to another at 5 times the speed of light, but for almost any other person, it would be impossible to find their way in that mind. Vader's mind was still a vast place, but it no longer held the entire galaxy. His heart had shrunk and shriveled until it had room only for himself and a select few family members. His mind now was a house of mirrors, an endless labyrinth even he could get lost in sometimes. There were thousands of visions, from the future and the past, half remembered upon waking up from a restless night, reflected in the walls of his head. The number of futures showing his family to be happy and together was so small, and it was so hard keeping track of them, but he could not let them slip through his fingers. He had to fight his own madness, if only for their sake. For his angel. Once they were alone in Padme's ship and ready to leave the Executor, all energy seemed to leave Anakin. I can't figure him out, Padme. What is he thinking? We're on opposite sides of a war and he's acting like nothing is wrong. Your father allowed us to escape even though it could mean great trouble for him, Padme reminded him. As twisted as his way of thinking is, I think he believes he's doing everything he can, considering the circumstances. The young Jedi shook his head. You don't understand. My father doesn't fear any retribution from the Separatists. It's not like he believes in their stupid propaganda, and he's not interested in money either. He only fights for them because of me. He wants to test me, to gloat about how much stronger than me he still is. I thought so too at the beginning, but before he came he said things to me. What kind of things? Anakin wanted to know immediately. He said that there's another Sith, a rival that he wants to get rid of. He said he's close to a member of the Senate, maybe even a senator himself, and that this man has such a great influence on the whole government that it has to be replaced completely to cleanse it of the corruption. That's stupid, Padme. The Jedi would have sensed it if there was a Sith in the Senate. How do you sense if a person is a Sith? I remember when we first met, the Jedi had no idea who your father was until he faced off against the assassin. Anakin shifted uneasily. My father is a special case. He's very powerful, he can mask his presence in the Force. It's very hard to do, not even Obi-Wan can do it completely. But what if it's true? Couldn't this rival be just as strong and able to hide himself too? What if we've been led around all this time? Now you're talking like a separatist. The Separatists are just as bad, if not worse, for fighting this war over money. But if they have been driven to this by one person that is also behind the part of the Senate supporting the war, then we might be able to end it if we take out that one person. And if it's a lie after all, we would be wasting time searching for a traitor in our midst and be blind for the actions of the likes of Count Dooku. Do you really believe that? Padme reached out for him and laid a calming hand on his arm. Do you really believe that, Anakin, or is that what you tell yourself? Anakin stared on the controls in front of him and didn't answer. He also told me that you've been in contact with each other ever since you became a Jedi. On Geonosis, I thought you didn't have any idea that he'd be there. Why haven't you ever told me? I didn't know he'd be there. I didn't think. Anakin swallowed hard. I always knew he was a Sith, but I thought he'd hold himself back for my sake. And maybe he did. He said he'd always be there for me, and then he raises an army and seeks to destroy everything I stand for as a Jedi. Though, Ani, I never knew it would hit you that much. But it didn't. That's the worst of it, Padme. It wasn't a surprise. I should have known, and subconsciously, I think I did. I was waiting for something like this to happen for years. Force, he practically told me when I first left that he might start a war just to kill some time. I knew when I left Tatooine that I had basically released him into the world. The Jedi have such high expectations for me, they think I'll defeat the Sith. What if I was never meant to become a Jedi? What if it was my role to stay with him and to keep him from going rampage on the galaxy? I left him and now he's free, he's unleashed, and I'll never be able to put him back again, not unless I become like him. Ani, what your father is doing is most certainly not your fault. On the contrary, the fact that you have kept in contact with him this long might be the only reason why he didn't go to war sooner. Whatever his plans are for the Republic, you are obviously more important to him or he wouldn't have let us go. There might still be a chance for you to reason with him. Anakin looked at her hopelessly. I'm not good at reasoning with people, Padme. Don't worry, she reassured him with a smile. That's what you have me for. The Jedi looked at her for a few moments. Then suddenly he leaned forward and lightly pressed his lips on hers. I don't know what I'd do without you, he muttered. I don't care what kinds of plans my father has for me, I'm more concerned about the way he looked at you. Well, you were the one who told him that we're together. And I will forever curse myself for that slip-up. Now he's taken an interest in you and that can't possibly be a good thing. Do you think he will tell someone? She asked worried. No, I don't think so. If he told the council they would kick me out. He does want me to leave the GD order, but he wants me to do it willingly. I think he would consider such methods beneath him. He doesn't like politics any more than I do. That's something, at least. Pad was silent for a moment before suddenly she started giggling. What's so funny? Well, all in all, for the first time that I officially met my father-in-law, the meeting didn't go too badly. Do you think I got his approval? Anakin joined in her laughter, his mood lifted up once again. I think you did, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if he sent us a late wedding present. I just hope it won't be something too disgusting like the head of General Grievous or something. That would be just like him. Back on the Executor, Darth Vader was getting a very rude holo message from said general, about how he could have let the GD escape, that caused him to actually dwell on the idea of ending the humanoid's life prematurely. Maybe, he thought, his son would like to see his head. He could make it a wedding present. Obi-Wan Kenobi left the ship, sighing when he felt solid ground under his feet again. He was escorting a group of transport ships with food and medicine for the soldiers that fought on this planet. It was the first time in 4 weeks that he got to see Anakin, since the boy had claimed his own Padawan and been assigned to the front again. His division had reached a victory here, and he was looking forward to seeing a familiar face in a small pause between all the traveling and fighting. Where can I find General Skywalker? Obi-Wan asked the first clone-trooper he came across. It still felt strange, thinking of his former student as a general. Sir, he should be in the command tent over there. Obi-Wan followed the directions but found the tent empty. However, he saw a young girl going through lightsaber motions barehanded behind the tent. For a moment he stayed to watch her until she noticed him and stood straight. General Kenobi. Welcome to our little camp. You're bringing the supplies, aren't you? That's right. You're Ahsoka Tano. She smiled at him. The one and only. How's life with my former students? He asked curiously. Exhausting, she admitted. But I do learn a lot. It's certainly never boring. Yes, I know, it's impossible to be bored well in one room with him. Can you tell me where to find him? Ahsoka's expression darkened somewhat. He's in the medical tent. Immediately Obi-Wan was worried. Did something happen to him? No, we just had some losses in the battle. One of the commanders got his head smashed by some flying debris. They got along well, I guess he's saying goodbye. Oh? He didn't know what else to say. He was a good friend. She looked away. At first Obi-Wan had thought that her dark expression was because she disapproved of her master showing compassion this openly, but now she realized that the death affected her too. It might be the first friend she had seen dying on the battlefield. She needed her master now, and Obi-Wan wondered why he wasn't there. I'll look after him, he said. The girl just nodded passively. Upon entering the medical tent, the GD found the strangest thing. A force barrier, a widespread mental command to stay away from the detached part of the tent. He was not prepared for the sight that awaited him on the other side. Anakin was kneeling next to the corpse of a clone-trooper whose head was an utterly mangled mess. Various medical instruments were sticking out of his bared brain. Anakin's hands were covered in dried blood, and his eyes were dark and empty as he worked on the skull. Anakin! The GD exclaimed in horror. What are you doing? Anakin looked up and some life returned to his eyes as he recognized him. Obi-Wan, he whispered. I figured you'd arrive soon. Come here, you have to take a look at this. What are you doing? He repeated. He really tried not to misinterpret the grueling sight in front of him, but he wasn't sure he could. I almost have it, Anakin muttered. He leaned over the corpse again, and a terrible crunching noise later he was holding up a pair of forceps with a small metallic chip. That's it, he said with a trembling voice. Anakin, Obi-Wan said, trying very hard to remain calm, explain to me what is going on right now. The boy looked up at him as if he only realized now how he looked. On Geonosis, Master Qui-Gon told me that the Republic was being manipulated by a foreign Sith. He said the clones were merely a means to an end, and that they would turn against the GD when we're at our weakest. The clone army was ordered by a GD, Anakin. Yes, one who isn't alive anymore and can't explain himself. Also, you discovered the Confederacy only because you were tracking the clones' origin to them, didn't you? Don't tell me this doesn't smell fishy to you. That doesn't explain why you take apart this body. I thought about what he meant. How would one go about controlling so many beings into going against everything they have been taught? A mind trick won't be enough to do that. You'd need a small army of Sith to do that. Nobody, not even my father, has resources like that. But the clones have been bred to follow commands. They do have their own mind and character, but if the Kaminoans have created them to be absolutely loyal, a signal of a special frequency could simply awaken certain genes that have always been in them, robbing them of their own mind, and reducing them to mindless followers. Such a signal would be too complex to send over long distances in a reasonable amount of time. The only way how it would be feasible is if you implanted them a transmitter that stored the signal, and activated only upon recognizing a certain code. Anakin took a deep breath while Obi-Wan felt like he was going to vomit. I didn't want to believe him, but I had to be sure. So I thought, if I took apart this clone and found nothing, I would let it rest. But you found something, he finished his sentence. Yeah, Anakin whispered. It doesn't have to mean anything. We already knew that the clones were created to be obedient. And don't you see anything wrong with that? They are human beings as well. They have their own mind, can make their own decisions, or at least, they should be able to. Yet they don't even get to have a choice, but to fight in this war. They're basically our slaves. Obi-Wan flinched at those words. It was an ugly truth, but a truth nonetheless, when they had all tried to ignore. The Jedi remembered that Anakin of all people had reason to despise the fate of the clones the most. I get that we need them, Anakin continued, looking down at the corpse strangely unbothered by the blood still covering his hands, and most of them are eager to fight anyway. Without them the Republic would fall into the hands of either those greedy jerkasses from the Confederacy or my father's madness. But it's still so wrong, and I can't believe that a Jedi Master should have ordered the army, or that the Senate would choose to have these chips implanted. And if it wasn't the Jedi and it wasn't the Senate, then you think it might be the Sith, Obi-Wan concluded. It would make sense, don't you think? Even so, we have no reason to suspect that the Sith behind this isn't Vader himself. Why would he tell me about this if it's his doing? To test you? To confuse you? Why does he do anything? Still, we can't rule out that there might be some truth to his claim. Obi-Wan sighed. No, we can't, he admitted. Which means we can't take this to the Senate. Anakin's shoulders slumped. We can't take it to the Jedi either. Even if the clone army is wrong, the Council ignores it as a necessary evil. If they knew about the mind-controlling chip, they would be forced to do something about it, and doing anything at all would either include informing the Senate or committing treason. Obi-Wan rubbed his face, feeling how they were both sinking deeper and deeper into a great black hole. Anakin was still looking at him with those big blue eyes, trusting that he would know what to do. He was kinda glad that at least the boy was still seeking his consultation, that he had waited with this inspection until Obi-Wan came to visit, but he couldn't help but think that life would be indefinitely easier without his former Padawan, and his habit to stick his nose where it didn't belong. If we start using the dark side to fight, he muttered, then we have already lost. Anakin looked at him confused. What does this have to do with the dark side? The dark side is wrong. Keeping this a secret is wrong too. The Jedi took a deep breath and looked up, searching for the calming vastness of the sky, but only finding the dark plane of the tent. How far has it come with us? Then, Anakin said slowly, we'll tell them after all. Obi-Wan's gaze returned to him. No, he decided, we can't tell them. We can't tell anybody. If it was issued by the Senate, there's nothing we can do, and if it's a plot of our enemies, telling somebody could trigger whatever trap is hidden in it. The clones are all over the galaxy already. If they turn against us now, it would be disastrous. Then what can we do? Oh, how he hated to be the one to make the plans. But he couldn't leave it to Anakin either. The boy was still impulsive at times and could do more harm than good if he wasn't restrained. We will do whatever we can to end this war peacefully. We will concentrate our efforts on negotiations, finding a compromise with the Confederacy, even at the risk of splitting the galaxy. That is what we Jedi do, we preserve the peace. Anakin's shoulders slumped a bit, and for a moment Obi-Wan thought he was actually disappointed. But then he said, that's great and everything, but what can I do to help? Obi-Wan raised an eyebrow. You will help me, of course. But I'm not good at talking. You don't honestly think there's any chance for me to get past Vader's fleet to even meet with the official leaders of the Confederacy without you covering my back, do you? Anakin gave him a crooked smile. It'll be just like in old times. Yes, well now I think it's time you cleaned up this mess. And I don't want to ever find you taking apart a friend's head like that ever again. Promise, Anakin replied with a grin, and Obi-Wan shuddered. Anakin was taking this far too lightly still. He wondered just where he had gone wrong with this war. XXX. 2 years later, the Clone Wars went on and on without an end in sight. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, with the help of Padme Amidala, Bail Organa and a couple of other senators, had made multiple attempts to reach the Separatists' council and negotiate a truce. But the council was getting overly confident, encouraged by Vader's success on the battlefield. Why should they agree to peace when the war was filling their pockets endlessly? They earned so much money selling their droids and weapons to planets in the Confederacy, and if they showed signs of giving in, they just threatened them. The two Jedi had some success with planets outside of the trading guilds, and prevented a lot of neutral systems from taking their side. Whenever they seemed really close to reaching their goal though, something would always happen to mess up their efforts. In most cases it was an assassination or an attack on a peaceful planet that caused the people to cry out in outrage, and demand the Separatists to be crushed. Darth Sidious had made multiple attempts to get rid of the negotiator, but Anakin and his Padawan Ahsoka were always there to bust him out at the last moment. The Jedi Council had an ongoing dispute with the Chancellor whenever or not Anakin should be stationed elsewhere, where his talents would be of more use. Obi-Wan argued that Anakin was the only reason he was even allowed to break past Vader's blockade occasionally. Everyone else was usually blasted to pieces. Palpatine tried to appeal to Anakin's ambitious side to get him to apply to be transferred himself, but the young Jedi was set on dissuading his father from his current path, and keeping his old master from spiraling down into depression, and wouldn't budge. Ahsoka was a great help for that last point, as it was impossible to stay glum around her for long. Ironically, they were back on Geonosis today. Vader was still on his way to the planet. He'd insisted on being present at any negotiation that might promise to be successful, though only negotiations that Anakin took part in seemed to hold such promise for him, so they were greeted by his apprentice instead. Darth Maul had gotten somewhat used to having to replace Qui-Gon, though he still shoved a lot of his work on Firo. After the negotiations, Anakin and Ahsoka were to continue on a mission to another planet to help the oppressed people rid themselves of the droids stationed there. Another encounter with General Grievous awaited them. That is why Ahsoka was present today as well, instead of leading her own unit to battle. She was 16 now after all and a well-trained Jedi. Obi-Wan and Anakin went off to start the negotiation, and the girl was left alone. Well, as alone as one can be under the watchful eyes of a Sith apprentice. They were staying in a wing of the palace opposite of the two Jedi, and the young Tigrita couldn't help but notice that the room was suspiciously bare of furniture. There was only a couch and 2 armchairs with a small bar. Not much to destroy during impromptu lightsaber duels. For 20 minutes straight, Ahsoka and Darth Maul did nothing but stare at each other from opposite sides of the room. The air was so thick it was hard to breathe. Then suddenly a silver protocol droid waddled into the room. "Hello, I'm C-72, Human Cyborg Relations. Would you like some tea?" Ahsoka shuddered as she felt the air suddenly compress. It was as if the tension that had built up between Padawan and apprentice had suddenly switched focus, flipped around like a rubber band let loose, and attacked the poor protocol droid instead. In a clatter of metal and spilled tea, the droid's components littered the floor, his head giving out a last, "Oh my," before his eyes went dark. Ahsoka glared at his Abrax some more. "That was not necessary," she said. "He was annoying," Maul simply stated, eyes narrowed to slits. "You can't just rip apart people if you're annoyed." Ahsoka huffed. "Actually, yes, I can. I'm a Sith, remember? Besides, it was a droid. I don't think I hurt its feelings. I'm not even attempting to talk to you about something as complex as was," she sneered. "It's a question of good behavior. Hasn't your master taught you that?" Darth Maul gave a dry laugh. "You know nothing about my master Jedi. I know that he teaches you using torture. What a splendid life that must be." The words just seemed to spill from her mouth, years worth of frustration suddenly released. "You must be so proud to be allowed to lick his boots." Ahsoka smiled in triumph when she saw Maul's eyebrow twitch angrily, the only reaction he allowed himself. "You wouldn't even begin to understand the power I hold in my hands. What good is all that power if you only use it to hurt people?" Maul smiled cruelly. "I never said the power was of the good kind." The Jedi Padawan turned away, disgusted. "You really enjoy this, don't you? You're a sadistic idiot who takes pleasure from the suffering of others. Are you implying that you are any different?" Before Ahsoka could protest, the Sith cut her off. "Don't you feel the same rush of excitement in battle? Don't you feel thrilled at having overcome a powerful enemy or a large number of inferior soldiers that arrogantly dared to challenge you?" He tilted his head, his yellow evil eyes piercing her, seemingly seeing right to the bottom of her soul. "Would you really prefer sitting in diplomatic meetings all the time, bothering with corrupt politicians? I have to do that too, you know. My duties are not so different from yours. But every time I leave the battlefield behind, I'm bored out of my mind. My master's lessons might be painful, but they mean a challenge, so yes, it is indeed a splendid life." Ahsoka was taken aback. She had somehow always assumed that the Sith generals were forced to work under Vader, or simply endured him to either fight for their misshapen beliefs, or to gain more power. She hadn't thought it possible that someone would actually enjoy being around that man. Yet she could see Maul's point. Ahsoka felt always sad, sometimes angry or disgusted after a battle when she had been forced to kill the Separatists, didn't only send out droids after all. Each of the regiments was always led by a sentient being. That was not counting the planets the Republic had had to essentially conquer, or all the criminals and bounty hunters fighting with guerrilla tactics that they had to fend off. So yes, she had killed. She had never been proud of it afterwards, but during the battle itself, in the heat of the moment when it was her life or the life of her enemy, it was exciting. Maybe it was her fearless master who had inspired this perspective of hers, but when she fought with everything she had. No regrets. No mercy. There was just a desire to do her best. Darth Maul chuckled, noticing how she was unable to look into his eyes any longer. "Darker light doesn't matter, little Jedi," he lectured her mockingly. "All that matters is the reason you fight for and whenever or not you manage to remember it. I know exactly what I fight for. I fight for my brothers and for my master. What are your reasons to raise your blade?" Ahsoka met his gaze again, unrelenting. "I fight for the free people of the Republic." "What about the free people of the neutral planets? What of the people that do not want to be part of the Republic any longer, that want to be independent? They only want to fill their pockets. What is so wrong about that? Isn't the desire to live in luxury right that every free person has if they have the means? What right does the Republic have to deny them their profit? Why should those capable and intelligent enough to make money suffer only so that a few inferior idealistic fools who are good for nothing but manual labor can raise their living standard? That's incredibly selfish thinking. That may be so, but just because it is a different philosophy than the one you're used to doesn't mean it has to be wrong. You have to remember that this war is not fought by the free people of the Republic. It's fought by the Senate, and it's fought because those people know their entire economy would crash if they allowed the Separatists to become independent. For years now your master and General Kenobi are trying to find a compromise when all the Senate has to do is make a few changes to their economy laws that lower their own income via taxes and increase the share of the traders. That would mean barely anything would be left for the people who actually made the goods. On highly developed separatist planets, that may not be a problem since everything can be produced with droids, but the peaceful people like farmers would be left in poverty. Though they would, of course, still earn enough to live, Maul said. Else there wouldn't be any goods to trade with soon. But I agree their life wouldn't be a very good one. That way intelligence, cunning, and ambition would be valued over physical strength and a more passive lifestyle. The point is, GD, not all people are the same, and thus should not be treated the same. Those talents were given to us to protect other people. That is our responsibility because only as a whole can we work together to become the best we can be. Darth Maul nodded slowly. That is your belief. The question is now if you believe in it so strongly that you would start a war over it to force your philosophy on other people who don't agree with you. Ahsoka, seeing where this was going, was at a loss of words. Because that is exactly what your so-called democracy did. Obviously the Separatists are so many in number that they can pose a serious threat to the Republic, yet they somehow never manage to win a vote in the Senate. That is because your Republic isn't a democracy at all. It is one step away from dictatorship with all the senators being either blind or corrupt. Those are the people you are fighting for, GD. The Padawan gaped at the utter insolence of the Zabrak. Are you telling me you're the good guy? That you're fighting for democracy and freedom? Darth Maul laughed. Not an evil laugh or even a mocking one, just an honest, amused laugh. Ahsoka had thought he was trying to get under her skin, unnerve her, maybe even tempt her, but he was just enjoying himself. Silly GD, of course not. I'm not like Count Dooku or Master Jin. I already told you, I care nothing for philosophies. My loyalty is not to ideals but to people. I merely meant to show you that your reason to fight is rubbish, and thus you have no right to look down at me for mine. Ahsoka felt stumped. She had to admit maybe she should have taken greater care to look into the Republic's history, and how this whole war started in the first place. She had been a youngling when it began and busy with books and lightsaber forms and meditation. She hadn't followed the news regularly, but even if she did, she had to admit that there was probably different propaganda in Republic and separatist areas. Ahsoka didn't want to be like that Sith. She wanted to fight for what she believed in. That was what GD did. She was sure that he was wrong about the Senate being corrupt. Many GD had told her repeatedly that the claims of the separatists were rubbish. She knew his words were wrong, but right now she couldn't see exactly where his flaw in logic was. But she would find out. She would raise the archives of the GD temple when she got back, read up on old newspaper and laws and all the other boring stuff, and find a way to disprove him. Ahsoka knew the Sith was wrong, but in order to continue to give her best, she had to be certain. How was she supposed to be a good negotiator and peacekeeper if she couldn't explain to people why the separatists were wrong? So she would research and ask questions, and the next time she met this arrogant jerk, she would tell him just what it was that she fought for, and she would beat him with her resolve. XXX, waiting, my son. You know what I want. Obi-Wan stopped in his tracks and, carefully shielding his Force presence as good as he could, he leaned against the wall. Vader had, as he usually did, found some excuse to drag Anakin out of the meeting. Officially Anakin was here as Obi-Wan's bodyguard, not his partner since he didn't take part in the negotiation itself. Vader had established a rule after which there were no bodyguards allowed during such meetings, at least, no breathing ones. That meant that the Separatists usually still had an entire unit of droids behind them, while Obi-Wan had to go alone. Thus Vader had an excuse to both stay away from the political stuff himself and to work on Anakin. Of course it worried Obi-Wan. Anakin always came back a bit shaky and, most of the time, angry from those meetings. He usually talked to him about it, but he also sensed that he was leaving out things. He was ignoring it for now, safe in his belief in Anakin. He had to trust his student not to give in. Honestly, he didn't think he could bear it if he didn't. Anakin was the one thing that gave him something to hold on to in his life. In a time where his belief in his teachings, the cause he fought for and justice in general was questioned, he needed Anakin to stay strong. When he came back from the meeting to catch Vader trapping the GD against a wall in the corridor, leaning over him menacingly, his first impulse was to rush to his help and get that foul monster away from the boy he raised. Yet he hesitated, staying where he was instead. There was something going on between those two, something Anakin was not telling him, and he had to know what it was if he wanted to help. I have what you want, Anakin ground out, but it's becoming harder to get. This stupid war didn't leave me much time. Are you asking for another victory? A little respite, some unexpected free time. I can fight my own dang battles. Good. Because I was just about to suggest you get a fatal injury. Something that would keep you away from duty for a few weeks. That should do the job as well. Forget about it, he snarled and pushed a small rectangular package into Vader's arms. There. Are you happy now? Certainly. Have a nice journey. And don't forget to deliver my greetings. Vader left and Anakin remained standing for a few more moments, silently fuming. At last he made his way in the direction their ship laid. Obi-Wan waited some more before he followed him. Ahsoka was already waiting for them, and soon they were starting their ship again. How was the meeting? Anakin wanted to know after some time. I got them to agree to release the people of Salakami. Well, at least to return the government to them. They will have to resign from the Republic but are allowed to stay neutral. That's good, I guess. Obi-Wan sighed. I'm happy I could help the people, but it's not really great progress. There are so many other systems that still need help. Still, you succeeded to preserve thousands of lives in a single day that we would have to save in months of battle otherwise. That's a good thing. You shouldn't be too hard on yourself. The GD was silent for a moment. You're probably right, he allowed. Ahsoka, would you mind checking the ship for tracking devices? No answer. Ahsoka jerked her head, apparently waking up from whatever deep thoughts she had been immersed in. I'm sorry, Master, what did you say? Obi-Wan scowled lightly. Is everything alright? Of course. Why wouldn't it be? She answered just a bit too aggressively. Now Anakin was scowling as well, having noticed her tone. Obi-Wan was glad. It meant he didn't have to worry about it when Anakin took care of it. He didn't think he could handle dealing with the students of his student trouble as well. Would you mind checking the ship for tracking devices? He repeated. You think we're being tracked? That's a precaution. I am to drop you off at another military base, am I not? Ahsoka complained, but Anakin reprimanded her and she quickly left. Really? Obi-Wan just wanted her to leave him alone with his former Padawan for a minute. How was your meeting with Vader? He began after overcoming his hesitation. Annoying, Anakin growled. As usual. Did he threaten you? Not really. He wanted to know how my training with Ahsoka is going. Told me an anecdote about General Savage relieving General Grievous of 3 arms, after he found out it was him posting all those photos of him and Ventress in the holonet. That was Grievous. Seems unlike him. Actually no, it was my father. He faked a data trail back to Grievous. Apparently he thinks that sex scandals make his apprentices appear more human. They're not human. Not one of them. You know what I mean. Silence. Then. It was kinda funny, though. Obi-Wan suppressed a sigh. Was there anything else? Anything you want to tell me? No, I don't think so. What about that package that you gave him? Anakin tensed up immediately. A wary look, not guilty but wary, passed over his expression. I don't know what you're talking about. By the Force, Anakin, are you allying to me? The GD exclaimed. I saw you with Vader. I saw how you passed something to him. He seemed suspiciously happy about it. Anakin's shoulders slumped. He didn't dare look into Obi-Wan's eyes. It's not what it looks like, he muttered. Then explain it to me. Anakin, you're like a brother to me, but I have to be able to trust you. You can trust me. Anakin exclaimed. It's got nothing to do with the war, I swear. Then tell me what it is. Anakin gripped at his own hair, squirming like an animal in a trap. It was just some photos, he said at last. Photos? Obi-Wan echoed, emotionless. What kind of photos? Anakin squirmed some more, still not looking at him. The compromising kind. The GD took a deep breath. He didn't like how he had to pull every word out of his former student. Of whom? Of me. Crap. Anakin, what have you done? Nothing. Why are you passing compromising photos of you over to Vader? It's his price, okay? He demands them in exchange for giving us the possibility to negotiate. How long has this been going on? Since the beginning. Dang it, Anakin. Now it was Obi-Wan's turn to grip at his hair. Why haven't you told me? Anakin cringed but didn't answer. What does he want these photos for? I don't know, blackmail material, I suppose. I have to know what is one of these photos. Anakin shook his head. I can't tell you. Of course you can. But he took a deep breath. It could get me expelled from the Order. The GD felt his blood freeze. That bad. Anakin nodded miserably. It seemed they would have to play the guessing game. Obi-Wan centered himself, prayed to the Force for support, and began to ask calmly, did you kill someone? No? I mean, not outside of battles. He looked a bit sick at the thought. Obi-Wan took it as good sign. Did you hand over secret information to separatists or kept knowledge of someone else doing it to yourself? I'm not a dang traitor, Obi-Wan. Did you mistreat any of your given subordinates, or what do you think I am, a monster? I did none of those things. Well, how should I know if you don't tell me anything? I broke a rule of the GD code, okay. Which rule? You know, the one Anakin looked like he was about to bolt any moment. Obi-Wan was pretty sure only the fact that they were in a spaceship in the middle of hyperspace kept him from it. He used the dark side. It was more a statement than a question. And you're doing so regularly if you give photos to Vader every time we pass him. He closed his eyes in pain. This couldn't be happening. Was his former Padawan now turning into a Sith, just as his former master had? Obi-Wan. Anakin exclaimed and grabbed his shoulder, forcing him to look at him. I can't believe you would think that. Actually, I can barely believe I managed to hide from you this long. I'm in love with Padme. I broke the rule of attachment. She loves me back, we're happy together. Padme Amidala. Anakin was in love. He was not turning dark. Obi-Wan felt as if a weight was falling off him. Wait, then what about the photos? The ones I gave him today, they were from our trip to the city under the waters of Naboo. She was there to renew the contract with the natives that live there. I had just finished a mission and sent Ahsoka to Coruscant with the report, so I had 2 free days. We just spent some time together and made some photos. We made an album of them. I don't know why, but my father is crazy for those. So it's just photos of the 2 of you. Together. Yeah. Just us visiting places and stuff. Sometimes he asks for special things. Like what? Like when he wanted to have an album of our honeymoon. You what? Nothing adult, of course. You married? Kinda, yeah. When did that happen? And why the heck does Vader know about this, but I don't? Shortly after Geonosis. And it's not like I told him. He just figured it out. At that time, it was the only thing that stopped him from keeping Padme prisoner or doing worse. And it never once occurred to you that he might use her to force you to do things. I'm waiting for him to do that every day. But he's never used the information for anything other than getting pictures. I think, I don't know, maybe he just wants to be part of our life, you know. Obi-Wan sighed. Anakin, he's a Sith Lord. He does have an ulterior motive, you can be sure of that. Yeah, I know. Evidently, you don't. There was this awkward silence again. Will you tell the council? Anakin asked at last. That was the real question, wasn't it? Obi-Wan couldn't help but be relieved that Anakin wasn't turning after all, but while his liaison with the senator might not have immediate bad consequences, attachment was prone to leading to the dark side. It made Anakin vulnerable, and in his position he could not afford to be vulnerable. Especially not with Vader looming over him. If Obi-Wan told the council about it, they would expel Anakin, he was sure of it. They had to, regardless of how valuable he was as a Jedi and a general. If Anakin was expelled, Obi-Wan wouldn't be able to keep an eye on him. He would no longer be under the surveillance of the council, even if he was able to keep his post as general. There would be nobody left to protect him from Vader and his machinations. It scared Obi-Wan how readily he had asked Anakin if he had committed murder or torture. It meant that, at least on a subconscious level, he thought the young man capable of such things. The dark side tempted every Jedi, but Anakin needed to be shielded from it more than anyone else. If he wouldn't tell the council, then he had 2 choices. He could demand Anakin separate from Padme, or he could help them to cover up their relationship. Now that he knew of his secret, he could look back on the years and ask himself how he not seen it. Of course, Obi-Wan had been aware that Anakin liked the senator. He hadn't exactly been subtle about it up until the Battle of Geonosis, after which he had grown suspiciously quiet concerning that subject. At that time he'd hoped the war had finally forced him to grow up. Now, he knew better. If they married shortly after Geonosis, it meant they were together now for 3 years, and obviously they weren't growing tired of each other. There was a very real chance that Anakin would choose leaving the Order over leaving Padme. He couldn't let that happen. Dang. No, Anakin, I won't tell the council. But I expect that you will be honest and open with me from now on, do you understand? Oh, of course. Thank you, Master. Anakin's expression shifted from surprise but joyful to guilty. And I'm sorry to put you in that position. First, the thing about the clones, now Anakin's insane marriage. Yes, he really should feel sorry. Obi-Wan didn't like having to keep so many secrets, but there wasn't much he could do. Just try not to multiply, okay? That would be really hard to explain. Anakin went betrayed and muttered something incomprehensible. This conversation now officially fell under the category of those you never wanted to have with your master. This is such a stupid idea. Farrell huffed and crossed his arms. Why? His brother Savage wanted to know. You're the one who always says we should stick together. Well, yes, but I mean 3 of us. He gestured to Maul, Savage and him, sitting in a round in the lounge of the Vigilance, Maul's main ship. Why? The Sith apprentice asked testily. Vader belongs to us too, doesn't he? Yeah, but he's our master, not our brother. Don't you guys think there's anything wrong with that? It might sound weird at first, but if you think about it, it really isn't, Savage said, very sure of himself. He was getting more excited as the conversation went on. Alright, he's cruel and crazy and sometimes downright creepy, but think about how much we learned thanks to him, how much he helped us to grow. He saved our lives countless of times in battle. We owe it to him, but it would be awkward. Incredibly so. For us, maybe, Maul admitted. But I think he would appreciate the gesture. I don't know about you, but if it pushes me higher up in his good graces and puts him in a fine mood, I'm totally for it. Well, if you put it that way. Ha! I knew you'd agree, Savage said. So, now we just have to plan it. Wait, you haven't done that already? Farrell wanted to know. Of course not, why would I ask for your help if I had? I thought you just wanted me to be there for it. Maul shook his head at their childish bickering. I don't think either of us is qualified to do the planning, he decided. It's not like we can throw a giant party. We need the help of someone who knows him well. You mean better than us? Who are you talking about? Maul smirked. Isn't that obvious? I'm talking about the mother. Understanding dawned on the Zabrak's faces, just as the red holo image of the Executor's artificial intelligence appeared in their middle. The Vigilance was currently trailing the Executor on their way to the next battle, so they were close enough to receive her signal. Somebody call for me. The mother asked, striking a pose with one hand at her hip as she flashed a smile at the Zabraks. The system was constantly monitoring every part of every ship in its range, so of course she knew what they had been talking about. Maul repeated it anyway. Yes, mother. We need your help in planning Darth Vader's birthday. Fierl stifled a groan at how wrong that sounded, which in turn made Savage snicker. We missed his last one since he was busy conquering Dantooine at that time, but now we're all together and relatively free. The mother struck a thinking pose, even though her processing power probably allowed her to have a million plans and scenarios at hand within a second. Well, you're right that a big party wouldn't suit him. He would, however, appreciate a great get-together of all his friends and family. Okay, so that's us, and well, Fierl made a helpless gesture. Vader didn't really have that many friends. How about Dooku? Savage suggested tentatively. That guy can ruin any party, Fierl protested. Besides, he's only enduring our master for a lack of other choices. But Vader would enjoy messing with him and seeing him act all awkward because the situation is so absurd, Maul thought aloud. I'll put him on the guest list then, the mother complied. If we invite Dooku, we can also invite Ventress, Savage noted. Maul made a face. You know, that's disgusting. What? You and that woman? I mean, you really can do better. Brother, Savage answered with a predatory grin. You have no idea how hot she's in bed. And I don't want to find out. Good. More for me. Eyes, let's get back on topic, shall we? Fear urged them. If we invite both, I'm afraid it would come out more like a military meeting. There wouldn't be much else one could talk about when there are only Sith. If I could offer my advice, the mother cut in. Any birthday party would be absolutely useless without Anakin Skywalker Jr. on board. There was an awkward silence. Well sure, but how would we get him to attend? Fear laughed at last. Oh, the AI said with a sadistic little smile, don't worry about that. I know just the thing. I'll make him attend. Him and his Padawan, and while we're at it, the senator they're both so fond of as well. And how do we keep them all from smashing in their heads? Savage asked skeptically. That's simple, the mother claimed. We'll just add my sister to the list. You have a sister. Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mother. She's on good terms with both of them, and thus they'll want to behave around her. Wait, I think I met her once, Savage said, scowling. Isn't she that chick that lives on Tatooine? You're telling me the master is still keeping in contact with her? Oh, yes. I'm exchanging letters and video calls and lots of pictures on a monthly schedule. She would be absolutely delighted to visit. If you bring her up early, she might even take over the catering and presents and other traditional birthday stuff. Dang it, Savage cursed. I haven't even thought about presents. The mother rolled her eyes with a smug smile. I know. That's why you need me. Very well, Maul said and stood up. His birthday is in 3 weeks. We have another major battle before that, but I think it's possible to bring Shmi Skywalker here in 8 days at the earliest. Mother, how much time do you need to get the GD here? If I can get him within my long-range transmitter range, it'll take him up to 3 days. I can time it more precisely if I'm closer. I don't have to be in the same system, but I shouldn't be touring the Outer Rim either. Then we have to find a reason for Vader to take you there. That could be a problem if we want to keep this a secret. A secret? The mother asked, confused, turning towards Maul. You mean keeping information from him? The Sith fidgeted a bit as her gaze grew cold, and, dare he say, suspicious. It's a human thing, he tried to explain. The surprise will make the pleasure even greater for him. The mother didn't look convinced. Look, of course we have to tell him about Shmi. You can say you received a call from her or something that she wants to visit, he won't deny her that. It's just a party in Skywalker that we'll keep from him. The red image still scowled. But we will tell my sister the whole plan, won't we? Of course, we need her help after all. The AI relaxed a bit. Very well, I suppose her loyalty is sufficiently confirmed that she wouldn't take part in any plot that aims to harm my master. And ours isn't. Savage muttered, slightly offended. She ignored him. I'll think up a reason why we have to go to the sector in question. If nothing helps, I can fake an emergency call from one of the council members, and later pretend I've been hacked. She sniffed a bit as if the mere prospect that she could ever be hacked was an unequaled insult. Then I will go and get Shmi when the battle is over. I think I can remember where she lives, Savage offered. I'll talk to Dooku. If he gets a message from a computer, he might just refuse, Fierl said. He then looked pointedly at Darth Maul. That leaves you to pick a present. It will be enough if we just say it's from all of us, won't it? It's the gesture that counts, the mother agreed. Maul scowled a bit, fully aware that his brother had dumped the most difficult mission on him. However, he did have an idea what to get his master, so he didn't object. The tasks thus distributed, the mother blinked out of existence, and the Zabraks got to work. They wanted to make that day perfect for their lord. 3 weeks later, Anakin Skywalker and his Padawan were on Naboo, once again on duty to protect Senator Amidala. The planet's economy had been one of the most influenced by the refusal of the trading guild to exchange goods with it, and so Padme had agreed to meet with their leader, Newt Gunray, to possibly start making business again. The offer had been unexpected to say the least, and the GD Council had suspected it might be a trap by the Separatists. After all, Gunray was known for his hatred for the Senator. That was why they had insisted to send a GD guard with her. Their first choice had been Obi-Wan, but he was still in hospital, having quite nastily been cut up by General Opus in a random battle. It wasn't anything too serious, but enough to chain him to the bed for a couple of weeks. That's why instead of the usual duo of Anakin and Obi-Wan, he only had his Padawan with him this time. The three of them entered the building where they were to meet in waiting, passing line after line of security droids. Anakin was tense the whole time but didn't pass so much as a glance to the robots. "Anakin, is everything alright?" Padme asked hesitantly. In front of Ahsoka, she had to be careful how to voice her concern. "It's nothing," he answered. "Just had a bad night. More than a bad night, in fact." He had been plagued by nightmares of a grueling nature. When he closed his eyes, he still saw the pictures flash by. He was running through empty gray corridors, his heart thumping loudly in panic. There was a scream, a terribly familiar scream. It was his mother, crying out for him, screaming for help. She was hurting, but he couldn't help her, couldn't find her. Every time he thought he'd arrived at the source of the terrible noise, it would move farther away. The dream had been so vivid, unlike anything he ever had before. At once he was assaulted by a wave of guilt. It had been ages since he'd last contacted his mother. Vader used to play intermediary for them, but of course after the war started, he stopped getting messages from her. She shouldn't be in danger. She should be safe on Tatooine with her new husband. Yet Anakin couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't. He'd heard that some GD could see the future, that the Force revealed things to them that were to come, and he was terribly afraid that his dream had been such a vision. He was afraid his mother was in danger, somewhere out there, and she needed his help but he wasn't there. Padme took his hand gently, and he could see the worry in her eyes. "It's going to be alright," he told her with a forced smile. At least, he thought it would be. The Force wouldn't send him a vision about his mother being in danger when Padme and him were about to walk into a deadly Separatist trap. Or would it? Suddenly he began to sweat. If both his mother and Padme were in danger, which disaster would the Force warn him from? He couldn't afford to lose either of them. He absolutely couldn't stand the mere idea of having to choose. They had reached the end of the corridor, which opened into a wide meeting room. The walls were lined with droids, but there was not a single living being present. "What's going on?" Ahsoka exclaimed as the doors closed behind them, her hands already on the hilts of her lightsabers. "It's a trap," Anakin muttered darkly, drawing his own weapon. But as he ushered Padme behind him and regarded the droids, waiting for them to attack, nothing happened. The droids remained unmoving. The lights of their heads were glowing, indicating they were not shut off, but neither did they attack, nor did they answer when he questioned them. "Master, look," Ahsoka finally said. She pointed at the table in the middle of the room. There was a small gray headpiece lying on top of it. Anakin inched closer slowly. He grabbed the headpiece and clapped it to his ear, scowling and never leaving the droids out of his sight. "Who is there?" he asked into the microphone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the headpiece came to life, apparently reacting to his voice. There was hard, labored breathing to be heard from the other side. "Who is there?" he demanded to know again, slowly getting angry. "Anakin. Anakin, is it you?" The blood froze in his veins. He knew that voice. It was his mother and she sounded panicked. "Mom?" he whispered, barely daring to take a breath. "Anakin, I don't know what's going on." There was a sob, and the GD felt an unfamiliar rage rise inside of him at the thought of someone hurting his mother. "Where are you, Mom? It's so dark, I'm hurting so much, what's going to happen to me? Anakin, I need you. I'm scared." The rage rose tenfold, almost swallowing the tiny flame of genuine fear, springing to life in his heart. There was a mechanical hiss on the other side, and the voice was suddenly cut off. Soon it was replaced by another voice though, a cold and mocking one. "Anakin," it said with dark amusement, and he recognized his father's voice at once. "Come and join us for tea, will you?" The words were followed by a dark chuckle before the line went dead. Anakin had gone pale. The hand gripping the headpiece closed without him noticing until the metal was crushed, leaving behind sharp bits that dug into his skin. "Anakin, what's going on?" Padme asked, utterly alarmed by now. "He has my mother," the GD Knight choked out, barely keeping the rage from taking over his actions. "He wanted to destroy something, he wanted to kill something. That idiot dares to threaten my mother." He felt a light touch at his arm and fling around, ready to strike at whoever dared to get close to him. It was Ahsoka, staring at him with wide eyes. There was something in her gaze he had never seen before. It was fear. Never had he seen her like this, not on the battlefield, not in the face of mortal peril, never. She had adopted his fearless nature, moving at her target with precision and determination. Now she looked scared, and she looked scared of him. With a growing sense of dread, Anakin realized that the dark side was surrounding him, swirling like a stream caught in a whirlpool. Like stars and planets being sucked into a black hole, that was his soul. Anakin took a deep breath and struggled to rein in his emotions. He couldn't afford to lose control. His mother being in danger was terrible, but he still had two other loved ones to take care of. He couldn't just forget about them, and he knew that he would. He would forget his reason for fighting if he ever gave in to that power. I have to go and save her. I'm sorry, I just have to, he said, looking apologetically at Padme. Ahsoka will take you back to Theed. This trap was meant for me only, they'll let you pass. But Master, you can't go alone. Ahsoka protested. You have to protect the Senator, he told her with his best strict glare. That's a command. Padme crossed her arms with a determined look. Well, I think she's right. You shouldn't go there alone. This isn't an official mission, Anakin, he's obviously planning something. We're going with you. Absolutely not. There's nothing you can do against it. You can tell Ahsoka to stay with me and protect me, but if I choose to look for this woman, she'd be obliged to come and help me. Ahsoka perked up, grinning at the Senator and thanking her with her eyes. Padme, Senator, I might be able to make a deal to get her out of there, but my chances are significantly lower if my father has the lives of 3 people to blackmail me with. That's exactly what we're afraid of, Ahsoka said quietly. You, making a deal. I can look after myself. Have you forgotten how many times I already saved your life in war, Master? We're supposed to be a team and I'm not letting you down. Time was running short, and the 2 women wouldn't budge no matter what Anakin said. Finally, he just threw up his arms and relented. The door opened again to let them through. Where are we going? We'll take a ship up to space. I'm pretty sure she's in a ship, so someone will likely come and pick us up once we're out there. Anakin threw away the useless headpiece. It wasn't a comlink with any sort of transmitter attached that he might be able to track a signal from. The message had to have been recorded, which only made him more anxious. How long ago had his mother been captured? The group was up in space 1 hour later, just flying around in the general vicinity of the planet, when suddenly gravity shifted as the giant body of the Superstar Destroyer Executor, Darth Vader's flagship, dropped out of hyperspace. Anakin didn't even have time for an evasion maneuver before his ship was caught in a tractor beam. He didn't doubt that they'd be halfway across the galaxy again before anyone on Naboo, noticing the ship could call for reinforcements. Mentally bracing himself, the Jedi stepped out of the ship. There was no welcoming committee, neither droids nor humans. The hangar was completely empty, which immediately set off his inner alarm bells. Of course he already knew it was a trap, but this was just creepy. Anakin and Ahsoka both had their lightsabers drawn, and Padme raised a blaster as they slowly inched forward. Anakin. Anakin. The voice of a female called out in fright, seemingly coming from everywhere. Anakin whirled around, searching for the source of it. Anakin, where are you? He was able to pinpoint a general direction from which the voice seemed to come and immediately started sprinting there. Master, wait. Ahsoka called and followed him with a curse on her lips. Anakin came to the first junction, wildly looking around. He thought he saw a flash of movement to the right, and there was another desperate sob. He took off again, the 2 women trailing after him. Rational thought had flown out of the window. He should have realized that something was off. He should have realized that while he heard his mother's calls for help, he never heard the sounds of footsteps, neither from her nor from her captor. He was led on a wild chase through the whole ship by sound only. It reminded him so much of his dream, his vision, and he was terrified of what he would find at the end of it. The Jedi suddenly came to a stop, having hit a dead end in a bare room. There was nothing here except for a lone chair in the middle of it, illuminated by harsh neon light. There was a person sitting on it, but it wasn't really a person. It was just the image of a person, a translucent red image, a perfect copy of his mother. Anakin inched closer carefully, his mind not understanding the pictures his eyes supplied. Mom? He asked tentatively. The red image smiled at him. Hello, Anakin. It was her voice. Anakin felt his knees weaken, and he unconsciously lowered his lightsaber, the hilt suddenly feeling so heavy in his hand. The image reminded him merely of something. Something his master, Obi-Wan, had once told him. He told him about how Qui-Gon Jinn had visited him, first in his dream, then during daytime. How he'd been nothing but a shade, a translucent image of his former self. A ghost carried by the Force to further torment him. Are you? He choked on the words, unwilling or unable to actually get them out. Are you dead? His mother blinked at him in surprise for a moment, but her smile never faltered. Of course not, silly, she answered. I can't die. Vader made sure of that. Wait, what? The mother stood up and, still smiling, came closer. Master, Ahsoka whispered warningly, trying to get him to back off, but Anakin couldn't take his eyes off the red image. Your father is waiting for you, Ani. We're going to celebrate, she exclaimed, a ridiculously happy smile spreading on her face. The same mouth that was now smiling brightly at him. He called for help desperately just a minute ago, and he couldn't fathom just what the heck was going on. Celebrate? He asked weakly. Maybe he was losing his mind after all. Of course, Ani. It's a surprise. Happy birthday. There was sudden swish as the metal wall behind the chair began sliding down, revealing the large room behind. In it there were all the people Anakin had expected to see. His father, the 3 Zabrak generals, even Dooku and Ventress, all dressed in their formal black Sith robes. But something was wrong because they were holding glasses of champagne and sparkling wine and talking amiably, and there was a giant freaking cake on a table in the middle of the room. His mother was there too, but she wasn't red and translucent, and neither was she bound or gagged or anything like that. In fact, she was smiling quite happily, and seemed to be in the middle of cutting the cake. When the wall was down, all of them looked over, and similar looks of shock and confusion passed over Vader's and Dooku's face as they saw him. Anakin? Vader exclaimed, looking as stumped as Anakin felt. What are you doing here? Behind him, his very much solid mother Shmai was smiling and waving at him happily, apparently completely unharmed. Anakin had absolutely no idea what to say. 20 minutes earlier. You've got to be kidding me, Darth Vader said rather blandly, staring incomprehensibly at the giant white cake. Happy birthday, Anakin. Shmai exclaimed with bright joyful grin. I worked on this masterpiece for 3 days. It'll taste great, you'll see. Count Dooku cleared his throat, looking quite amused at Vader's somewhat helpless position. I'm sure it will taste great, Mrs. Skywalker. It looks fabulous. You really didn't have to, Vader tried, but it was no use. Nonsense. This is your 37th birthday, we must celebrate it. The Sith Lord had no idea how to answer to that. It wasn't even actually his 37th birthday. It was his 61st. He was already claiming to be older than he was physically to explain why he had an adult son, but hearing Shmai congratulate him, he suddenly felt very old. His apprentice must have seen his grimace, or maybe he sensed a sudden spike in darkness in his aura, because he chose that moment to take Shmai's hand and lead her away from him. Why don't we look if we can find something to cut the cake with, Mrs. Skywalker? Oh? Of course, she said, following him readily enough. In the background, Ventress failed to conceal a light snicker. Vader turned around slowly, piecing the remaining 2 Zabraks with a murderous glare. His idea was that. He snarled. He felt the overwhelming urge to bang his head against the wall, when the 2 brothers promptly pointed at each other in an incredibly childish display. We merely wanted to surprise you to show how much we appreciate you and your guidance, Master, Savage said at last awkwardly. I'm sure your master appreciates your concern, Dooku drawled, not even trying to hide his amusement. It is the surprise part that may not have been appropriate. Fierl hung his head, looking thoroughly chastised. I am sorry, sir. We should have known better. There was a short pause. No, Vader said at last. I should have seen it coming. In fact, I shall congratulate you for catching me off guard. The Zabraks looked just as surprised at Dooku. Vader mentally grinned. He didn't like it one bit that another Sith, an apprentice no less, dared to reprimand his minions. After all, where would be the challenge if we all knew what life is planned for us? Vader said with a small smirk that elicited a relieved sigh from Savage. I'm really glad you think so, a disembodied voice threw in out of nowhere, because you're in for a couple of other surprises today still. With a red flicker, the executor's AI appeared behind Vader, smiling brightly. You, Vader exclaimed, fixing her with a glare, but most of his anger had already vanished from his face. I should have known that you had a part in this as well. Excuse me, Dooku said, looking a bit confused from the holo image to the corridor Shmai and Maul had vanished in. Surely you recognize Our Lady, Count Dooku, fear last. You must have seen her before around. This is the executor. Milady, you know of course the Count. Of course I know him. I have a full data record, complete with background, fingerprints and DNA results of every person who ever spent a night in my stomach. Dooku looked at her blankly for a couple of seconds, before turning to Vader with a scowl. Lord Vader, you might want to consider reconfiguring your computer's humorous recognition system. I don't know what you're talking about, Vader returned, the corners of his mouth twitching. This program is a virtual masterpiece. To change even a single bit would be an incredible offense to the creator. Who happens to be me. The mother was just barely not bouncing on her heels at that point, grinning wildly. I think it is time you see your presence, Master. Presence? Vader echoed and raised an eyebrow. Of course presence. Shmai exclaimed, having returned with a giant kitchen knife that somehow managed to make even his never heard of fly harmless human mother look a bit creepy. What would a birthday be without presents? She handed him a package wrapped in blue and silver paper. It was all a bit surreal. Vader could see Dooku and Ventress shift a bit uneasily, which made him snicker inwards. The Zabraks on the other hand looked pretty relaxed, and Vader couldn't help but feel his own mood lifted as well. Very well, he said and began to unwrap his first present. Yes, it was all a bit childish, but it made his mother so happy. He was confident in his ability to rain terror in his apprentices, even without being dark and gloomy all the time, and Dooku, well, he could die in a hole for all he cared, and watching the noble, so out of place between the rest of the merry group, was immensely entertaining. Still Vader made sure nobody could see what was in the package, just in case it was something embarrassing. A moment later he was glad for his foresight. His mother had gifted him a scratchbook full of photos, obviously copies of the ones he had sent her. There were photos from the Skywalker family when the young Anakin had still lived with them, photos from Shmai with her new husband and his son. There were some news articles from his more glorious adventures around the Outer Rim, and in the war articles describing his strategic genius and battle prowess, rather than any massacres he had taken part in. And of course there was a whole number of photos from Anakin and Padme. Thank you, Shmai, he said calmly, but took care to look into her eyes, relaying with his gaze what he couldn't say in front of his fellow Sith. Shmai smiled somewhat sadly, patting his arm. Just something to remind you of us, she said. She understood. I'm next. Shmai's self-proclaimed sister announced happily, completely oblivious to the deep moment between mother and son. There was a mechanical buzz, and then a small platform rose out of the ground, revealing a metal case. Vader approached it carefully, wondering what the heck a superstar destroyer would give him, and how she got the idea that she even had two in the first place. Maybe he shut down regulator sentience. Just a little bit. Vader pushed the green button that screamed "push me" at him, and the case folded in itself, revealing a head. A severed cybernetic head with glowing yellow lights as eyes, made from white metal with a skull-like appearance. Dooku leaned in, regarding the head with a mix of disgust and shock. Is that the head of General Grievous? It is, the mother declared proudly. Noting Vader's blank stare, she added, not the real one, of course. He still kinda needs it. I hacked him and borrowed some of his main files, so I was able to order the original spare parts of his cybernetic skeleton. Then I took over some crafting droids and put them together to create this replica. But wait, there's more. She gestured to Darth Maul, who got the hint and quickly went to the next room. He came back with a strange framework covered by red velvet, hovering behind him by use of the Force. Savage lifted the cover, revealing a weapons rack made from black durasteel. On top of the rack sat a pike, and on the mother's prompting, Feral took Grievous's head and set it on top of it. It was now crowning the construct as a morbid sort of decoration. The weapons rack in turn held around 24 different lightsabers. When Vader stepped closer, he recognized some of them that were unique in style, or that had some mark or another. They were lightsabers formerly belonging to defeated Jedi. My brothers and I gathered these from our respective trophies, Darth Maul explained, a hint of nervousness shining though since Vader's face was still blank. We decided to offer them to you, as it would have never been possible for us to become as powerful as we are without your teachings. What was left unsaid was that Vader had never abandoned his habit of loosing his lightsabers, and thus always had a need for spares. Vader straightened his back, his expression still impossible to read, but never took his eyes away from the framework. My students, he said at last, turning to them. You have done well. I accept your offering. The Zabrak's shoulders visibly sagged in relief. Maul even managed a proud little smile. You like it? The mother made sure, peering back into his line of vision. I like it, he repeated. I like it very much. Now he smiled as well, allowing just a hint of his true feelings to show through. Honestly, he was touched. They were all so different, and none of them knew anything about him from before he came to this world, and yet they seemed to understand him perfectly. His mother, putting his actions in war next to the pictures of the boy he had sacrificed so much to bring happiness to. His AI, picking up on his dislike for the cowardly general even though he had never voiced it aloud, creating a mocking, but also warning example of black humor that would undoubtedly make him smirk every time he looked at it. Finally, his students that were, even though they had grown so much and became so strong, still acknowledging their power as a product of his efforts. They were still loyal to him even though they had endured unimaginable pain at his hand more than once, to the point where they would give up personal trophies without being prompted, for no other reason than to please him. Vader had taken on the mantle of the Sith Lord as a means to an end. He did not believe in the philosophy of the Sith anymore, and the war he fought, while he did enjoy it, was not born from any personal belief, but rather from the sheer need to protect his family, and the desire to crush his enemies. In short, his life had been his job, something he liked doing, but wouldn't have necessarily chosen to do if the need wasn't there. Just like it had always been from the moment that he was forced to wear the black mask. Now though, for the first time in decades, he felt like he had a home again. Not necessarily a physical place that held any special meaning, he didn't even know where they were right now, just floating somewhere in hyperspace with a number of people that he had actually grown close to. People who had seen both sides of him, his light and his dark one, and who accepted him as the man he was. He had once again and totally unintentionally created himself a family. Next to the weapons rack, there stood Qui-Gon Jinn, visible only to him. Next to the equally translucent image of the mother, he seemed to fit into the round perfectly, smiling at him with those soothing old eyes shining in something like hope or pride, he couldn't quite tell. It would have been perfect, really, Vader thought suddenly melancholic. It was nice having a new family, but that didn't mean he didn't miss his old one. It would have been perfect if there wouldn't be his other half missing. Vader felt a strange sort of shock go through him, a slight electrical charge as the mother jumped at him, and, in a scandalous breach of her supposed minion character, hugged him from behind with her non-existing holographic arms. There's one last gift for you, she whispered into his ear, using the frequency that relayed her voice from the comlink attached to his collar. Vader turned around with a scowl. He really had to reconfigure her definition of personal space and borders not to cross when a wall formally dividing the room that was apparently much bigger than it let on slid down to reveal two very shocked Jedi and one stumped senator. Darth Vader swore in that moment that he would never mess with the Executor's internal program. Ever. She was his girl and she was absolutely perfect and he loved her. This was the best birthday ever. Mom, I'm fine. Anakin exclaimed, quite annoyed by now, grabbing Shmai's hands when she fretted about him. But you're so pale, you look like you've seen a ghost. Anakin's gaze flickered over to where Vader stood next to the blue holographic image of the very much dead ex-GD Master Qui-Gon, having some kind of silent conversation with him. Well, I'm so glad you came. I haven't seen you in ages. Of course your father still sends me photos of you, but it's not the same. Wait, he does what? Oh, I'm glad for them of course, but you still have to be careful. I mean, the rest of the world thinks you're enemies, don't they? Anakin was staring at her somewhat helplessly. Vader had given the photos to his mother, that actually made kind of sense. It was just hard to believe that the ruthless Sith Lord Darth Vader still held so much fondness for his mother, even though they hadn't been an item for decades. It seemed his mother had no idea how he'd been lured here. She lived in the belief that Vader and Anakin were still secretly in frequent contact, working together. Anakin opened his mouth to explain how wrong she was. However, in that moment Pat laid a hand on his arm, drawing his attention. Excuse me, Mrs. Skywalker. It's good to see you again. Oh? You must be Pat. It's so nice to finally meet you. Of course it is, I feel the same, she said quickly. I'm sorry, I just have to borrow your son for a minute. She dragged him away a bit, a worried Ahsoka in tow. I hope you weren't going to say anything to her, she muttered, worriedly looking out for the Siths. Had, she thinks I'm some kind of spy. She loves you, Anakin, but she also loves Vader. Do you really want to hurt her by telling her otherwise? Not to mention we're on Vader's flagship, Ahsoka added dryly. In a room full of Sith. I don't think you have any other choice than to play along if we want to get out of here in one piece, Master. His shoulders slumped a bit. I don't know if I can do that. I'll help you, Padme promised. And I'll look around and see if we can somehow sneak out, Ahsoka offered. Fine. But you have to be careful. The young Padawan wandered off, pretending to get herself some cake. She found the kitchen but headed out immediately after. Still the image of Ventress and Savage would forever be ingrained in her brain. She wanted to claw her eyes out. The Degreda was in the opening of a ventilation shaft when she felt a presence behind her. Apparently, she wasn't going to be left unsupervised. Enjoying the party? Darth Maul asked with a feral grin. Immensely, she returned, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I have to say, I'm surprised you actually came. I wasn't sure she could get you on board. She, the executor. It was her job to get you here. May I ask how she managed? Ahsoka regarded him suspiciously. She supposed he would be able to find out anyway. We were in the belief that this was a rescue mission for Mrs. Skywalker. Maul raised an eyebrow. Really? She was crying and calling for help. Why does the ship have her voice anyway? Nostalgia. Masochism. Homesickness. I don't know, Vader created her. I'm his apprentice, not his therapist. You're helping him to live in an illusion. Are you for some reason determined to push him over the edge or something? Maul smiled wryly. What makes you think this was my idea? Well, you certainly seem to enjoy playing along. And what's with that weapons rack anyway? Some kind of sick trophy display for all the GD you've killed. You don't like it? It's disgusting. I'll remember that in case I have to pick a present for you. Ahsoka was about to make another angry retort, but then she stopped. There was something in the Sith's tone, something that made her skin crawl. It couldn't be. Are you flirting with me? She asked scandalized. Maul's eyes widened a fraction. What? No. The Sith apprentice had to suppress a shudder. Granted, the small GD was a rather pretty girl, and well, he didn't get to see those very often. But she was also on the list of people Vader had forbidden to kill or otherwise hurt without reason. Which he'd inadvertently do if he came too close to her, and then he'd not only lose all the favor he'd gained with his master today, he'd also cause a lot of pain for his brothers. No need to be so adamant about it, he heard the Padawan mutter as she turned away from him. It seemed she had misinterpreted his outburst and was now offended. Maul couldn't help a small smirk at that. Disappointed. He teased her. Of course not. She exclaimed, looking at him in outrage. Who would want to be with you? You're a mass murderer. Well, some women find that attractive, he returned flippantly. He was not flirting, though. She was just fun to mess with like an angry kitten. Besides, you kill people as well. It's called war. I believe we already had that conversation. You're a selfish, arrogant jerk. Coming from the rude, ill-behaved child. You're Sith. He raised an eyebrow. That wasn't very offensive. You'll have to do better than that. The anger was boiling strongly in her now. Her fingers curled to fists and trembling as she stared at him with all the focus of a released blaster. Fine. Ahsoka spat. You're an ugly monster, and the only way you could make a woman scream for you is by cutting her in half. Maul felt his heart skip a beat as he took in her words. He felt like laughing, but quickly suppressed the urge. He frowned instead and crossed his arms before leaning forward to her. That was outright dirty, he whispered, making her take a step back as she regarded him cautiously. You are truly sinister. Are you sure you don't want to switch sides? I'm certain you would look hot with yellow eyes. I don't just shut up. She managed at last before whirling around and leaving the room. Maul's gaze followed her until she was gone, a smirk grazing his lips. An angry kitten, indeed. Meanwhile, on the other end of the lounge, Darth Vader had cornered his younger self. It's been more than 10 years now that you spent with the GD, my son, he began, watching completely relaxed how Shmai and Padme helped themselves to some cake, talking amiably. How are you doing? Anakin looked at him somewhat incredulously. Oh, I don't know. There's an intergalactic war going on, but other than that, I'm fine. Vader sighed. Are you still angry because of that? You have to grow up, Anakin. You have to decide for yourself what is most important in your life. I can tell that it is certainly not that war. Anakin bit his tongue in an attempt to not make an angry remark. You have a wife now, a family. There will come the day when you have to choose between her and the GD order. I know how you will decide. Do you? You said I have to choose. I'm doing fine. I know it's difficult. This isn't about leaving behind the Force or even your life as soldier and adventure. You could continue to do that outside of the order if you wanted. It is about choosing between the GD and your family. More specifically, it is about choosing between Kenobi and Ahsoka and Padme. Everyone else is irrelevant to you. Vader put some pressure on his son though the Force, making him look at him. You are already a traitor, Anakin, living a double life. The time where you have to choose will come and it will come soon. You can only make it up to one of them. Anakin was stumped for a moment and just met his father's gaze. It was easy to say that Vader was evil and crazy and obsessed. But in that moment it was like Anakin had never left home, like Vader was just a normal dad sharing his wisdom with his son. The GD realized Vader did love him after all. Obi-Wan and him had been using that love for years to their own merit with Vader always giving in. Though they had saved countless of lives that way, it suddenly felt wrong to him. If he really meant that much to his father and he was merely misled about what Anakin wanted his life to be like, maybe there was hope yet. Maybe there was hope for their broken relationship to be mended. Maybe he could bring his father back to the light after all. How am I supposed to choose? He asked weakly. But Vader caught the trembling in his voice. He didn't comment on it. I understand your desire to keep everyone you love around, but that is impossible. Once the GD find out about your relationship with her, the best you can hope for is to be given an ultimatum if they don't expel you immediately. If you chose her, you will be cast out. Your GD friends will see it as a betrayal. Even if they don't refuse to ever talk to you again, doing so would taint their own reputation. If you chose to leave Padme for them, on the other hand, well, you can imagine her heartbreak. You can't just be friends with her again. It is far too late for that. What about you? Anakin asked, honestly curious. What would you like me to do? I never understood why you sent me with the GD all those years ago. You must have known what it would do to our family. Vader smiled sadly. I wanted you to be happy. I didn't want to mess you up by forcing you to stay with me if you didn't want to. He took a sip from his glass and looked into the distance. And I wanted to have grandchildren. Anakin went a bit red at the last one. I must say, I would be disappointed in you if you left your wife, Vader continued seriously. She really seems to love you. I don't think that's ever going to happen, but I am afraid that you'll wait too long to leave the order and thus endanger her. Anakin took a deep breath. He had a sudden idea, one that looked a lot like the solution to all of his problems. I can't leave the GD order, he said, not while we're in the middle of a war. They need me here. But you, father, you have the power to stop this war. Obi-Wan and I have a dozen different peace treaties completely worked out. All you'd have to do is frighten the Separatist Council a bit, so they'd sign it. If there was no war, I could leave the order in good conscience and just be with Padme. His father got a sudden forlorn expression. That would be a nice life, wouldn't it? It would, Anakin hurried to say. I wouldn't mind it at all. It would make me happy. His mouth twitched in a semblance of a smile. If there's something I'd wish for my birthday, it would be this. Vader chuckled. Alright, I'll think about it. Really? The GD could barely believe his luck. I said I'll think about it. I'm an old man, don't expect any miracles from me, Vader chastised him lightly. Anakin felt that this was the end of the conversation. As surreal as this party had felt, he might have made more progress in the negotiation department than in the last 2 years combined. There might still be hope for the galaxy after all.